The story begins with Kim Jun, an ordinary office worker, riding home from work on the bus and watching the trailer for a major game update. It was 2023. And with the development of technology, the quality of games had improved, and the era of virtual reality games had arrived. Kim Jun's game of a lifetime was Over the Fantasy, or Over Fantasy for short. This game is less popular than those that came out around the same time. The reason is that the game's system is so realistic that the difficulty level is quite high. And unlike other games where you can become stronger by simply spending money on donations, in this game you only pay when you buy the game itself, and there is virtually no incentive to donate. You cannot become stronger if you don't have the skills. Meanwhile, Kim Jun had already returned to his apartment and closed the door. He took the bag off his shoulder and quickly ran to the game capsule. It was these conditions of the game that attracted the guy to it. Because this game is no longer just for nerds, but for mega nerds. The guy leaned against the capsule, hugging it, and saying that he wanted the work to end as soon as possible. Today, the game was getting its first major update in 3 years, and the planned update time was midnight, but it was only 7 in the evening. The guy looked at his watch and thought he needed to get ready. He pressed a button on the capsule's body, and its lid opened, revealing the chair inside. Kim Jun took off his jacket, climbed into the chair, put on his glasses, closed the lid, and a multitude of game windows flashed before his eyes. The capsule announced that iris recognition was complete and access was granted. The game welcomed the guy and asked him to choose the character he wanted to play, and a multitude of human figures appeared before him. In the world of this game, you are considered a nobody, even if you have 3 characters at the maximum level. Kim Jun had all 7 characters. However, he was going to approach the character who had not yet reached the maximum level. It was a figure of a guy in simple clothes. The character's name was Dio, he was level 10, and he had no class. Kim Jun touched the character and shouted that he was choosing him. This character was used for inventory, and the guy took him specifically for storing items. In bright rays, the guy found himself in the middle of some square, and he had already become one with the character. The guy immediately noticed that a new class had appeared, and while he was organizing his items, he needed to collect items that would give him a level up. Opening his inventory, he noted with irritation that there were hundreds of different items in it. He realized that this would take quite a long time. After a while, Kim Jun ran his hand over his forehead and sighed with relief. He approached the NPC, the warehouse keeper, Tony, who was an old man with a gray beard, and thought that he only had the Evra village storage left. Organizing the inventory took a long time because the items were so mixed up, and the guy asked Tony to open the subspace. Tony replied that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, and that the fee for using it was 1 silver coin. In this game, the fee for using the subspace increases proportionally to the level. This is also the reason why players keep their characters with inventory up to level 10. Kim Jun, looking through the inventory, finally found what he needed. He reached out his hand, and it calmly sank into the game window. He withdrew his hand and took out the Lycan's kukri knife, saying that he needed to give it to another character. Looking through the inventory again, he wondered why he had put all this junk in his inventory. Suddenly, the game displayed a notification that server maintenance for a large-scale update would begin in 15 minutes. The system warned players that they needed to log out of the game to a safe place, and Kim Jun exclaimed in surprise that he had spent 5 whole hours organizing. But the system notification suddenly disappeared, and the guy thought he would deal with it when the time came. It was the village of Evra, for which the appropriate level was 100, and as long as you didn't leave the base, you would be safe even at level 10. Kim Jun continued to organize, while the system warned that a major update would occur in 5 minutes. But suddenly, the game glitched, and the color of its notifications changed from blue to red. Then there was a bright flash. The guy had his back to all this, so he didn't notice anything strange. The game displayed a message saying that a system error had occurred and that sending messages was no longer possible. Soon, Kim Jun finally finished organizing his inventory and exclaimed that he had finally done it. Stretching, he thought about how hard it had been to deal with this. But as he clenched his fist, he realized that something was wrong, and it scared him very much. He suddenly began to look around nervously. He didn't understand what was going on. He wondered why he hadn't passed out. Maybe the check was delayed? But that couldn't be, because there were no notifications. He thought that he should log out of the system directly. The guy raised his finger and shouted, calling up the system. A system window appeared in front of him, but it was full of interference. He looked at the corner where the exit button was usually located, but it was no longer there. So how could he log out of the system now? In the next moment, the guy suddenly realized that all his senses had become more acute. A drop of cold sweat rolled down his face. And even though the technology was advanced, could the game really be that realistic? He looked at his hands, which glowed slightly blue, and thought something was wrong. Suddenly, he clenched his fists and thought it was a rift in the dimensions. And then he ran quickly, thinking he needed to go there, to the only place in this game where he could play with others, the very place where he could meet other users. When he got there, Kim Jun found only some kind of archway, and the rest of the space was empty. The guy exclaimed in surprise that there should be a gate here, but it was empty. Suddenly, someone bumped into him. As it turned out, it was a little boy who waved his hand and apologized to the guy. Then he asked him why he was standing there, to which Kim Jun had no answer and just stood there uncertainly. He looked at his hand again and thought about how distinct the sensation of the collision had been. Beads of sweat rolled down his face, and he wondered if this place was real. The guy gritted his teeth and thought that couldn't be. It was definitely a game. There had just been a glitch, and the touch sensor had probably broken. And so, when he got out of here, he would definitely sue the game company. But after 3 days, Kim Jun still couldn't get back, and he had no choice but to accept that the game had become reality. What's more, he was a character with a level 10 inventory. Meanwhile, the soldier at the training ground shouted for the others to put all their energy into it and swing their swords. Kim Jun stood aside, leaning his back against the boxes, while the soldier turned to another and exclaimed how such a weakling could protect the village. After 3 days of struggle, the guy finally accepted the fact that he was now in the game. However, he was greatly struck by the fact that among all his powerful characters, he had become the weakest and most foolish. Nevertheless, he could be glad that at least he had money. But still, the fact that he was in the game did not calm him down, and so he desperately grabbed his head, which one soldier noticed. Coming closer to him, he asked what Dio was doing here at the training ground. Kim Jun smiled weakly at the man and told him that he was just looking around. The soldier asked the guy if he wanted to train together and came closer to him, to which the guy laughed awkwardly and stepped back, refusing the offer, and thought to himself that he didn't even have a class, so how could he train? Suddenly, he came to his senses and asked the man why they had suddenly started group training. Scratching his chin, the man replied that it was all because of the waves. Even though Evra Village is a peaceful base where NPCs live, there are times when waves of monsters come to attack them. You can fight and level up in a team with NPCs, which is much easier than fighting alone, and this is a training system developed by the game company. But for someone who came to a level 100 village with a level 10 character, that in itself would be a disaster. Based on this, Kim Jun thought that now was not the time to lazily mourn the circumstances. After all, it wasn't a given that if he died here, he would return to his reality. Kim Jun clenched his fist tightly and decided that he had to try very hard now. After that, a bunch of game windows popped up around him. Returning to Tony, Kim Jun decided that he first needed to properly sort out his inventory. He thought that if he changed his character, he would be able to change his class as well. Finding several scrolls, he came to the conclusion that he now had access to a martial arts master and an assassin. However, the guy's character stats were too low for him to change classes. But suddenly, he found another scroll that glowed purple, and he noticed that the purple color could only be seen when changing the title of the second stage. The scroll opened, and it turned out that it allowed him to change his title and move on to the second stage depending on his current status. And this scroll could be used at the altar of the Forgotten Temple, and the guy thought he couldn't use it. But suddenly, after rereading the scroll, he was surprised to find that he could use it. Could this be a hidden part of the game that he didn't know about yet? This game is more realistic than any other virtual reality game, and it was carefully thought out. The guy couldn't find a single bug, and the amount of information provided to users is much less compared to other games. To enjoy the game, you have to track down and find hidden content yourself. So there were many negative reviews, but the guy actually liked it. Looking at the scroll, he thought he had never heard of such conditions before. Namely, that you had to be first class or lower and have a reputation of 500 or higher. So this was definitely a hidden part that no one had discovered yet. The guy rolled up the scroll and thought that the most important thing for him was survival. However, there were a huge number of secrets in this game that he had yet to uncover, and that made his blood boil. The guy thanked Tony and quickly ran off somewhere. Tony waved to him and told him to come back again. Then Kim Jun headed to the mercenary guild in the village of Evra. He entered the building, which was already full of people, causing the room to buzz with conversation. He walked onto the bar counter. Suddenly, someone pointed at Kim Jun and asked if he could see that there was a line. After looking the guy up and down, the man noticed that he was not the type of person who could easily afford such a place. Turning up his nose because the guy smelled like a loser, the man asked what this pathetic person was doing in the mercenary guild. Kim Jun approached the counter, threw something on it, and asked for permission to meet with the gentleman. As it turned out, the guy had thrown an old Class A mercenary card on the table, proving that he was a mercenary who had gone beyond the veteran level and reached the rank of expert. The girl behind the counter looked at the card in surprise. Others standing nearby also reacted very emotionally. Kim Jun smiled, thinking about how they say that less than 0.1% of mercenaries have one, and he just took it from his inventory. And the guy had a plan that included using this seal to disguise himself as a Class A mercenary. And with the help of a cloak with camouflage spells, he would hide his true identity. Suddenly, Kim Jun reached under his cloak saying he wanted to show him something, and then he took out some metal and thought that this imperial metal was like a pass to anywhere. But if everyone saw it, he would be in trouble. Showing the metal and putting it back, he asked again if he could meet with the gentleman. Meanwhile, the guy was thinking hard about whether they would ask him to prove anything. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. The man said that it seemed an important person had come to see them. The man was very well built. He bowed his head slightly and introduced himself, saying his name was Cotton, and he was the leader of the guild. Then he invited the young man upstairs to tell him more. The guy thought that now was not the time to show his fear. Folding his arms across his chest, he asked if he hadn't said he wanted to see the master. Cotton bowed respectfully and said that, unfortunately, the guild master was currently absent. But if the guy didn't mind, he could listen to him and then pass on the message. Kim Jun replied that everything was fine. He would tell him everything. As a drop of sweat rolled down his face, he smiled triumphantly and thought that now all that was left was to negotiate. The man and the boy went upstairs, and Kim Jun told them everything. In response, Cotton asked him again what he wanted them to assign him to do at the Forgotten Temple. Kim Jun replied that everything was correct and that there were no other conditions. Scratching his mustache, the man wondered why an A-rank mercenary would ask for such a thing. Then he said that he needed someone to accompany the priest, but all the mercenaries were already busy. The guy smiled and replied that he could do it. Then he said that he didn't need any reward for it. He just wanted to get to the temple comfortably. Hearing this, Cotton, somewhat taken aback, asked the guy if he really wanted to participate as an escort. The guy replied that this wasn't quite the case, and if something dangerous happened, he wouldn't just sit idly by, and then thought that if he said so, it would be difficult for the man to refuse him. They didn't need to prepare any additional rewards. And from the guild's point of view, as their combat strength increased, the risk of failure decreased. Folding his arms across his chest, the man smiled and replied that he understood and that it was possible. Kim Jun was happy that he had succeeded, and the man said that they would also notify the client of the changes and then asked him to fill out a request form. The guy signed the mercenary request contract, and the system informed him that a quest would appear soon. Cotton checked the contract and then said that everything was fine and the client would be happy too. Now the guy could leave, and tomorrow morning he should come to the north exit. Kim Jun turned and waved to the man in gratitude. As he walked out the door, he thought he needed to go back and prepare thoroughly, because if his identity was revealed, he would be in trouble. Meanwhile, Cotton smiled strangely at him as he left. The next morning, several mercenaries were discussing what would happen to them with the Class A mercenary. Another mercenary asked what this mercenary was doing in such a remote area, but suddenly they noticed Kim Jun approaching. One of the mercenaries held out his hand to Kim Jun, asking if he was the mercenary rumored to be there, and then introduced himself, saying his name was Raymond. Kim Jun replied that his name was Monte. The guy shook the hand extended to him, thinking that at first he had used a pseudonym, as he had planned, but something was wrong. Kim Jun was surprised to find that only 4 guards, including himself, had been sent on the mission. He scratched his chin, thinking that they must have reduced the number of escorts, since he had said he would participate, and then noted with irritation that this Cotton had fooled him. Suddenly, Raymond spoke up, asking if the client had arrived yet. Suddenly, a young girl with red hair braided into pigtails ran up to them, dressed in blue, and asked the men if they were her escorts. She stopped, caught her breath, and apologized for being late, and then, placing her hand on her chest, said that she had been entrusted with a mission in this temple, and that her name was Clara, and she was a priestess of the Temple of the Moon. The other mercenaries also began to introduce themselves while Kim Jun watched them out of the corner of his eye, and he noticed that her clothes looked worn. Apparently, she had been through a lot too. Suddenly, the girl turned her head, noticing that someone was looking at her. The guy was surprised to see that she was looking at him. A question immediately popped into his head. Did he look suspicious? But perhaps she was looking at him out of curiosity, as it was rare to meet Class A mercenaries, and then they set off. The system immediately notified them that they had entered a field significantly higher than level 10. After a while, it got dark and they set up camp and lit a fire. One of the mercenaries pointed to the map and said that tomorrow they would head to this camp, and that it was a small detour, but it was safe, so nothing would threaten them. Raymond agreed with the man and said that this was the safest route. But suddenly Kim Jun, leaning against a tree, spoke up and said that they should take the short route. After all, if they went to Camp 3, they would come across a cave there, which would allow them to quickly reach the temple. Raymond approached the young man and said that they knew the area better, and the way to Camp 3 was still unclear. Kim Jun replied that he could find a better way with his eyes closed, and that it would be much faster if they crossed the cave and went through the Danville forest. The man exclaimed that he didn't know what monsters lived in that forest. The guy thought that he himself didn't want to go there either. But the longer they walked, the more likely it was that he would be exposed. And then they would realize that he wasn't an A-rank mercenary, but just a level 10 character, without even a class. He thought he should remember this, and he shouldn't be afraid, and he should break through. He should act confidently. And then he firmly said that he was definitely heading for the third camp. And considering the ladies' endurance, wouldn't it be better for them to take a shorter route? And then he said that he wasn't participating in this quest for fun, and time was money. Meanwhile, he thought that they must be very angry, since he had asked for it himself and was now complaining about it. Then he asked Clara what she thought. Avoiding his gaze awkwardly, she said she would prefer to take a faster route. The other mercenaries sighed wearily. And then Raymond said that would be fine. But if something got out of control, he hoped that Mr. Monty would be able to solve everything for them. Kim Jun told them not to worry, but he himself was glad that he had been able to win the girl over so easily. Now it was time to go to bed before the difficult journey ahead tomorrow. The next morning, Kim Jun got up and began to stretch. Then he noticed with annoyance that his whole body was sore. But if this were all a game, a single night's sleep would have taken away all his fatigue. But now that it had become his reality, he would simply die of exhaustion. Raymond turned to Kim Jun and asked him if they would definitely reach the cave if they went this way, to which the boy replied that they would. If they deviated from this path, they would end up in werewolf territory, so it was better not to do so. But suddenly, the man went off somewhere, which made the guy a little angry. Looking at the guy, the man asked why he should obey him. Kim Jun was at a loss for words and thought that the man was probably very upset about yesterday. But he could use this to show them who was in charge. A short time later, the mercenaries decided to stop for a short rest. But suddenly someone let out a loud scream. It turned out to be Raymond, who was running away from a werewolf, and the system reported that he was bleeding. Kim Jun, noticing him, smiled and said that he had warned him to be careful. The other mercenaries grabbed their weapons and rushed to help their comrade, and one of them shouted at Kim Jun to help them instead of watching. The guy waved his hand and replied that he had warned them, so they should deal with it themselves. This statement angered the mercenaries, and one of them shouted that all he knew how to do was talk. Folding his arms across his chest and smiling, he told Clara to stay behind him. Then he thought that this was a great opportunity to test the strength of these mercenaries. A fierce battle began. The werewolf swung his claws, and the mercenary defended himself with his shield. Kim Jun thought that even though they were D rank, they were still above level 100, and therefore these werewolves were no match for them. And just then, the mercenary struck. Suddenly, Kim Jun glanced to the side, and noticed that Raymond was being attacked by two werewolves. His gaze darted to the other side. He looked at the other werewolf and concluded that it would soon die. Suddenly, the guy pulled a small club from under his cloak, thinking that he had demonstratively called himself an A-rank mercenary, and now it was time to show his cool side. The guy slung his weapon over his shoulder and walked forward, telling the girl that he had to help them. Suddenly, something hit Raymond's arm, and Kim Jun thought that these mercenaries had enough skills to catch one or two werewolves. However, if you don't have that skill, it will be difficult to finish the game without getting injured. And as it turned out, it was he who hit the man on the arm. Kim Jun walked past the other mercenary and told him to retreat. The mercenary, confused, asked what the guy was talking about. Raymond turned around and asked the guy if he had decided to join when they had already caught everyone. And then he noted that being an A-rank mercenary wasn't that difficult back then. Kim Jun replied that it must be them, and suddenly one of the werewolf's eyes flashed bright red, and suddenly something in that defense changed. He became even more frightening and wild. A huge shadow loomed over Raymond, causing him to freeze in fear and ask what was going on. Meanwhile, another werewolf struck the shield of another mercenary. The blow split the shield in two, and the mercenary cried out that it was dangerous and they needed to retreat. But suddenly, the mercenary turned and looked ahead in surprise, because Kim Jun suddenly struck the werewolf on the head with a sharp movement of his arm with his weapon, and then ordered the man to step back. Meanwhile, the werewolf, stunned by the blow, stood and stared at the sky, stars swirling around his head. Then the huge carcass of the beast fell to the ground with a loud thud. The mercenaries looked at the werewolf's body in surprise, because in their eyes, the guy had defeated it with a single blow. However, this trick uses the characteristics of magical beasts. Beasts fall into a state of madness just before death, and in this state their physical abilities increase and a certain amount of damage is negated. And the solution the guy used against such a magical beast was to use a calming plant. The guy hit his palm with his weapon, thinking that he had applied this plant to his weapon, and that is why he managed to overcome the rage. Suddenly he stepped forward and told everyone else to back off. And since the guy remembered all the monster's habits, the 100 level difference no longer mattered much. The werewolf attacked the guy, but Kim Jun anticipated each of its blows. The first attack with its claws comes from right to left. You need to dodge the second attack. When the distance increases, you need to attack head-on. The guy jumped up when the werewolf reached for him, thinking that something like that would make the werewolf turn his back. After a blow to the head, the opponent cannot stand on his feet, and this lasts about 5 seconds. And then you can deliver absolutely any blow. Raising his arm with the weapon, Kim Jun struck the monster in the stomach with a sharp movement, and then struck the monster on the head, causing its head to fall back and blood to gush out. In the next second, the werewolf's body fell to the ground, and the guy stood on it with one foot, while blood dripped from his weapon. He smiled, thinking that by the time the werewolf came to, he would already be dead, but at least he had put on quite a show. If the werewolf had been in his normal state, he would not have been hurt, because the guy would not have hit him. While Clara was treating Raymond's arm wound on her own, Kim Jun thanked her and said that he was indebted to his employer, to which the girl replied that it was all right because it was her job. Kim Jun asked Raymond how he was feeling. Putting his hand on his chest, he said it was his fault for choosing a dangerous path, and then apologized. Abandoning his gaze awkwardly and placing his hand on his head, the man replied that it was okay, and that it was his fault too. The other mercenaries discussed among themselves that even though the guy had been a little rude to them, his skills were acceptable, and he wasn't so bad himself. Kim Jun was pleased to think that everything was going according to his plan, and that he had managed to earn the gratitude, respect, and trust of the mercenaries. After a while, the team reached the cave, and Raymond said that everything was as Monty had said, but he never thought there could be a cave in such a place, and therefore, as expected, they should have listened to him right away. Kim Jun replied that absolutely anyone could have acted as a guide, to which the man told him not to be modest. Raymond said that after completing the mission, he would like to have a drink and listen to stories about the guy's adventures. And another mercenary asked him to tell more details about how he received the Imperial Medal. Kim Jun thought that he didn't want them to trust him so much and said that it wasn't time to rejoice yet, and then said that this cave was protected from monsters, so they could stay here for the night, and then suggested that the mercenaries determine the order of night duty by rock, paper, scissors. After a while, Kim Jun himself ended up losing. He sat down on a rock and thought that everything was going very well, and he had even gained the trust of the mercenaries. If anything bothered him, it was the major update to the game. He had raised 7 characters to the maximum level and knew the game by heart, but this knowledge could have become useless in an instant, so you always have to think and act even in the worst-case scenario. While everyone else was already asleep, the guy lay down on his sleeping bag and quietly said to himself that he would be fine. The next day they set off again, and on the way they encountered a wooden monster, in which someone immediately made many holes. As it turned out, it was Kim Jun, and the mercenaries began to applaud the guy, while Raymond remarked admiringly that it was amazing because the ENTs fell helplessly. The guy smiled and looked at them, thinking that it was all because he had used the herbal plague remedy, which he had invented while he was the owner of a max-level alchemist character. And then he thought bitterly that he would regret the experience he had before, because all his experience points would be cancelled because he hadn't changed his title. After a while, something suddenly attacked the mercenaries. However, the mercenary managed to defend himself with a shield, and Kim Jun thought that there were creatures that would attack even if they were sprayed with medicine. Suddenly, he told the mercenary that it was best to block the husky and ent stems, but not with a shield. Another time, while Raymond was swinging his sword, the guy told him that it was better to be more aggressive in fighting enemies who had status ailments. After trying it, Raymond replied admiringly that it really worked. The others also admired him, and Kim Jun thought that he was still instinctively giving advice. After some time, the team finally reached a large tree. Kim Jun scratched his chin and remarked that it must be somewhere around here. He began walking around the tree trunk, looking for something, and suddenly made a sound. As it turned out, he was looking for a hole in the ground from which a faint glow was emanating. The mercenary asked the guy if he could squeeze through this narrow hole, and he replied that he could and that it was the shortest way to the temple. Raymond asked another man if he thought he would get stuck, to which he replied that he had said he needed to lose some weight. Meanwhile, Kim Jun reached out his hand to Clara and warned her to be careful. Blushing slightly, the girl put her hand in his and replied affirmatively. Kim Jun smiled and told her that they were about to fall. So she shouldn't worry, the girl asked again. But the guy didn't explain anything to her, and then they jumped into the hole and flew down, with the guy still holding the girl's hand. Sometime later, they finally landed somewhere, sitting on the floor and holding their heads. Clara asked what was going on, and then she got up and began to admire the temple's decor. Meanwhile, the other mercenaries also landed on the floor with a loud noise, and Clara noticed that there used to be space there, but now there was a mural. Kim Jun scratched his chin and wondered what these murals meant. They must be the main plot and clues. Looking at one of the murals, he thought that, as far as he could remember, it depicted a battle between an evil god and the moon. A battle between the evil god, who follows the demon god, the source of chaos, and the moon god. Raymond also looked at these frescoes. Suddenly, he pointed to one of them and asked another man standing nearby what the fresco looked like, wondering if it was an execution ceremony. The man replied that he was an idiot, and that the fresco depicted an inauguration ceremony, and the man in armor was a knight. Suddenly, Kim Jun pushed Raymond back and shouted for everyone to stop and step back. Looking at the fresco the man was looking at, he noticed that they were different from the frescoes he knew. Suddenly, he remembered something and immediately thought that this fresco depicted the knight he had seen in the trailer. Suddenly, Clara spoke up and said that it was a prophetic book. Folding her hands, she said that she had seen many things in temples, but this was the first time she had seen something hidden in such a passageway. Kim Jun, remembering that Clara was a priestess of the Church of the Moon, asked her what the phrase meant. Looking again at the phrase written on the wall, the girl replied that it was an ancient sacred language that was no longer in use. Then she decided to translate the phrase. The translation of the phrase turned out to be the words, "The end of the world has come." Kim Jun immediately remembered the trailer and the night from it. He immediately remembered the first verse of the song from the trailer, and it dawned on him. He realized that a new event was currently taking place in the temple, one in which he had not yet participated. The guy thought it was scary, but he still had to move on because it was the only way for him to survive in this world. Turning to his companions, he said they needed to go to the temple. As they walked further and further, approaching the temple, everyone admired the architecture. Suddenly, they noticed a statue standing on one knee and holding a spear in its right hand. Kim Jun, looking at the statue, replied that first there was a fresco from the previous video, and now there was also a knight in armor from the trailer. Clara blushed a little and noted that it was a very beautiful stone statue. Kim Jun said that he had a feeling that it could start moving at any moment, and he himself thought that someday it would definitely happen. But Clara happily began to reassure the guy, telling him that there was nothing to worry about because the church had already confirmed that there was no risk here. The guy didn't believe it, but he didn't show it, and he thought that when an NPC appears, everything changes. And if this statue was really the guardian of the temple, then he definitely didn't come here to fight it with such force, and would be killed in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, someone exclaimed that they could see the altar, and the system announced that they had entered the zone of lost ancient heritage. The system reported that the first condition of the quest had been successfully completed, while Clara bowed to the men, thanking them and saying that thanks to them, they had all arrived safely. The guy thought that the mission to escort the priestess was complete, and the next goal was to change characters. Suddenly, in the next second, the very scroll that emitted a purple light appeared in front of the guy, and it immediately opened. The guy's eyes widened in surprise, and the system announced that the hidden conditions of the ancient legacy had been fulfilled, and suddenly the inscription on the scroll began to glow. Everything around him began to shake. Clara asked in confusion, "What's going on here?" Meanwhile, the statue also began to shake, and pieces fell from it. But suddenly the statue's eyes lit up purple, and suddenly all the stone fell off it, revealing something black. Raymond, in a panic, drew the others' attention to the light emanating from the statue. Hearing this, Kim Jun looked in that direction in fear and confusion. And what he saw surprised him quite a bit. As it turned out, instead of the statue, there now stood a huge knight in black armor. Seeing this, Kim Jun finally realized that this statue was not a guardian, It was the Knight of Death, an enemy that even level 300 players fight, a cursed paladin who had transcended death. He looked menacingly at the entire group of people. The guy smirked and said that this was definitely not the kind of monster that would appear in a level 100 field. He pursed his lips, thinking that there were more than 300 Death Knights in the 100th level field, and so his nerdy instincts told him that this was an unexpected event, and therefore defeating the Death Knight was not the ultimate goal. The developers are very secretive about their intentions in planning all events, so there must be another way to deal with this. Suddenly, another scroll flashed next to the guy, and the system informed him that he had a book of changes, and a forced hidden quest was activated. Kim Jun placed his palm on the scroll, and the system informed him that he must obtain the Death Knight's sword. And suddenly the guy remembered how he searched the internet for a strategy, how to easily defeat the Death Knight. To which someone replied that anyone who chose a paladin knew how weak he was against divine power. Among the NPCs, you need to take a priest, and you need to put a shield on the Death Knight, which the priest uses. If you do this, you can crush the Death Knight, break his shield, and skip the first phase. The guy thought this was exactly what he needed, but suddenly the floor around him burst into flames. The knight reached out and asked how the boy dared to enter the sanctuary. Clara suddenly exclaimed, addressing the boy, that it was dangerous. Kim Jun responded by walking over to her and grabbing her by the shoulder and telling her to prepare her holy shield. He thought that the trigger for this sudden event was the change in his title, so most likely the requirement for the event would be level 10 or lower and no class. Clara asked the guy if he was really going to fight, and then exclaimed that she wouldn't allow it because there was no chance of winning. Kim Jun took the girl by the shoulders and leaned down to look her in the eyes, then said that they couldn't escape, and therefore she must cast Holy Shield on the Death Knight as soon as possible. The girl looked behind the boy at the knight, and he urged her again. The girl's body trembled slightly with fear, and she gripped her staff tighter. Then her staff began to glow, and she closed her eyes and cast the spell. The protection of the holy moonlight will protect us. Then she waved her hand and pointed her staff directly at the knight. Suddenly, Kim Jun placed his hand on the girl's hand, and the light emanating from the staff changed slightly. Then he exclaimed that it was time, and Clara called upon the Holy Shield. A multitude of chains of light surrounded the knight. A shield appeared around him as the chains bound him, and the girl exclaimed that it had worked. Kim Jun, looking at the girl, thought it was amazing that she used the shield as a rope to hold him. But suddenly the guy said it was too early to relax. After a while, the Holy Shield fell, and the knight's sword appeared above his head. The knight lowered his arm, and his palm glowed with a purple light. Kim Jun smiled slightly and thought that the first stage was complete, all thanks to his strategy. But now the second stage was coming, and many swords rose into the air above the knight's head. These swords suddenly fell to the floor, piercing it. Clara screamed again that it was dangerous, but suddenly Kim Jun paused to think, and then shouted his question about whether the knight would recognize him. Suddenly, the system announced that the conditions had been met, and the knight's eyes lit up orange-yellow. The boy thought that in any game, the Knight of Death was an unusual opponent, and therefore the Knight of Death's case was allowed. The system announced that the dialogue had been activated, and Kim Jun thought that if he told a story related to himself, he might be able to move on to the second stage. He noted aloud that all of this was clues to the quest. They were all in the trailer. Lady Dark, the paladin in golden armor shown in the trailer. She was waiting for Pabel, who had gone for reinforcements. However, Pabel never returned, and Dark became a Death Knight, while Pabel, who did not return, turned into a wandering ghost. And this Imperial medal, which can be obtained by catching the ghost, indicates that the line continues. Suddenly, Kim Jun exclaimed, calling out to the lady, with his hand outstretched, holding the medal. He said that the mission had been accomplished. The knight stared silently at the medal, and then she approached the guy, kneeling on one knee, and then praised the guy, saying he had done a good job. Kim Jun noted that he had succeeded, and they recognized him as an ally. The system reported that the guy was able to find out that the Death Knight was Adelia Dark, the Holy Knight of the ancient Holy Kingdom. Adelia said that a long time had passed. She had been defeated and lost her god. The wait had lasted forever, and many comrades had died, and she began to list their names. However, Kim Jun couldn't hear a single name, as if the noise had been added intentionally. Looking at the medal, he thought that it seemed that not all the conditions had been met. He began to think actively, trying to understand what else he might have missed. Meanwhile, the knight raised her sword in front of her, from which bright lines of light emanated, and she said that it had awakened forgotten hope. And then she swung her sword sharply. The sword landed right on the guy's shoulder, making him flinch, and he thought it resembled the inauguration ceremony depicted in the fresco. Suddenly, he remembered the words from the trailer. You will blossom even in war. It was like a flower. The guy dropped to one knee, thinking that all the clues were in the trailer, but something was missing. Based on the lyrics of the song, could it be that Dark was waiting not only for factions and reinforcements, but also for the one she loved? He thought that the event had already been set in motion, which meant that he now had a clue, and therefore he had to figure out if there was anything here related to the person she was waiting for. He suddenly remembered that he had a map of the A-rank mercenary, and it was from the Tonto Temple, which was connected to the ancient royal family. And it's no coincidence that as existing items found new uses. And he had already told Tima aloud that although she was cursed to become a Death Knight, someone else was waiting in the body of the undead. Then he held out his hand with the card and asked her if it belonged to her. Suddenly, Dark shuddered and took a step back. Her sword fell from her hands. The system announced that Adelia's wait had been fulfilled, and she had earned the right to walk the path of truth. And suddenly, the armor on her body began to crack, exposing her skin. Her eyes were still black, but light hair and light skin showed through. She asked if he still loved her, even if she craved blood, even if her skin rotted and dried up. She fell limply to the floor, and the guy thought irritably, how should he know? Dark said that Kim Jun saved her between light and darkness. His spirit makes her tremble. Kim Jun told her that he was not the one she had been waiting for. Handing her the map, he said he was just a messenger who had brought his things. The woman replied sadly that she knew. With trembling hands, she reached for the map, one of which was still bound in armor. She touched it, and suddenly there was a bright flash, and she asked to send her man to heaven. Holding the card to her chest and removing the dark armor, she smiled and said with tears in her eyes that he was her flower and her truth. Suddenly, the system announced that the story of the fallen paladin was complete, and the reward was the sword of the ancient dead. The attribute of the reward was life energy. The system announced that the user's status was changing as new characteristics were added, and suddenly the guy's whole body turned into interference. He looked at his trembling hands, which were covered in pixels, and suddenly there was a bright flash, an explosion. Suddenly Kim Jun woke up, lying on the bed, and opened his eyes. Getting up and looking around, he found himself in his room. Looking around nervously, he said it was all a dream because a game cannot become reality. Suddenly, he remembered everything he had done, and the smile slipped from his face. Looking at his hands, he wondered if he was sad to return. But suddenly he woke up again, by someone's loud scream. As it turned out, it was Clara, who later asked how the guy was feeling. Clutching his head, the guy realized that it wasn't a dream after all, and the girl shouted to the others that Monty had woken up. The mercenaries immediately ran to the tent where the guy was. Some fell to their knees in front of him, but they were all very worried about him, and now they were glad that he had woken up. Kim Jun thought irritably that these guys had run away as soon as the night of death appeared, but he just said that he was fine. The mercenaries left the tent, allowing the boy to rest alone. Suddenly, an icon with a new sword appeared above the boy's head, and he said that it was the first time he had seen a detailed item. And why does he have such special restrictions? Sitting on the ground, he thought that this was to be expected, but there were too many of them. He could only figure out that the core of this update was the ancient Holy Kingdom. Kim Jun cursed under his breath. He thought he never imagined that his advantages would end like this, and since his life now depended on it, he needed to be more careful. Kim Jun got up and left the tent. Clara, noticing him, asked again how he was feeling, to which the guy replied that everything was fine, and then told her to take the mercenaries and complete the mission, as he had business at the altar. Sitting at the altar, he took a scroll from his inventory and opened it. He thought that there was no longer any need to doubt. The system announced that the title was being replaced. Suddenly, he felt the same energy that the Death Knight had instilled in him, and suddenly he saw the sword she had used. Small bolts of lightning shot out from the scroll, and the system reported that the replacement was successful, and that his title was now General. The system notified him several times that his level had been raised, and the guy thought that the points from the monsters he had caught were accumulating, and he noted that this was the first time he had heard of such an increase. Looking at the characteristics, he noted that it was a normal level, so had he set his expectations too high? Clara told the guy that they had completed the mission, so they needed to return to the village. Suddenly, she asked him if everything was okay. Kim Jun looked at her, smiled slightly, and said that everything was fine. After a while, they finally returned to the village of Evra. Raymond said that, as expected, A-rank special training was not easy, but he still felt stronger. Kim Jun thought that he had used it to level up. The man suggested that GG return to the guild and report, to which he replied that he was tired and did not ask for a reward at all. Suddenly, Clara exclaimed that although the guy did not want to receive a reward due to special circumstances, the Church of the Moon would grant him one. Raymond told Kim Jun not to be so angry and offered him a drink. The guy thought that he was talking like an older brother, and then thought that he had become attached to these guys, but now he had more important things to do. Then he turned around, waved his hand, and said he had urgent business to attend to, thinking to himself that it was better to stay away since he had lied about his identity. The mercenaries watched him leave with disappointment and sadness. When he reached his room, Kim Jun was finally able to take off his hood, and then told himself that now he needed to prepare seriously. The reason he had taken such a risk and measured the title was because of the wave of monsters. Kim Jun called up the status window, and a blue game window appeared in front of him. In this window, he noticed the class Forgotten Swordsman, and noted that, as expected, he was seeing it for the first time. He thought it might be related to the Death Knight and Adelia Darkness, because the red energy he received from the Death Knight was the key to the change. He thought he needed to calm down, because this wasn't the first time he had leveled up a character without knowing anything about it. But then he suddenly came to his senses. All the other max-level characters had been leveled up along the way, but the difference now was that it had become a reality. Kim Jun clenched his fist and told himself again that a wave of monsters was waiting for him, and so he needed to focus only on that. He thought that now he needed to test the skills he had gained when he changed his title. The first skill was Oath of Liberation, which could neutralize all target deviations by consuming the stamina of the person using the ability, and 10% of the caster's stats would be lost each time he made a contract. Kim Jun wondered if this was too risky. Wasn't it a good skill for destroying stats? And if the subject was stronger than him, the skill wouldn't work. And if he was weaker, it would be useless. The next skill was Chop. Kim Jun asked in shock if it was just a normal strike. However, it was also a skill, so he decided to try it. And suddenly the space under his feet lit up red. A wind rose, and the system announced that the skill would change depending on the player's status. The guy looked at his hand and noticed that it was the red energy he had received from the Death Knight. Suddenly, the system reported that the power of the Forgotten Swordsman had recognized the Seal of Fire, and the Chop skill had been changed. Opening his eyes again when everything had calmed down, Kim Jun saw a window in front of him that talked about the technique of Firegrass. The guy thought it was incredible. The conditions for developing the skill appeared before him, the fourth of which was unknown, and Kim Jun now understood why he had such a title. After all, his skills were now modified by the power he had received from the Death Knight. He noted that the essence of flame, which is a condition for developing the skill, was stored in an inventory in another city. As he gathered his things, the guy thought that first of all, he needed to level up in order to improve his skills. After a while, he reached the place where he began killing level 83 armored turtles. He remembered that these monsters were large but slow. He just had to dodge them. Suddenly, the turtle struck with its large paw, but the guy dodged and struck with his sword, thinking that if he dodged and aimed at its weak spots, the difference in levels would be easy to overcome. Kim Jun was already level 36. After killing the turtle, he noted that it was not in vain that he had upgraded his sword to the maximum level. However, if he had a better sword instead of this basic one, he could have done it faster. But he couldn't use the weapons he had in his inventory because they didn't match his level. Thinking that he still had a lot of work to do, he continued to kill turtles, increasing his skill level. He had to keep going, because who else but him? After a while, the guy's skill level reached 38.4 out of 100. After some time, Kim Jun finally reached level 50 and leaned tiredly on his sword. There were many dead turtles around him, and the boy fell to his knees on the ground. His face looked tired, and he thought he was on the verge of breaking down. But now he just needed to pick up the items, and that was it. Meanwhile, there were 5.5 hours left until the wave of monsters, and the knights in the city were busy preparing for this wave of monsters. The monsters were getting closer and closer to the city walls. Noticing them, the archers were ordered to stand ready and then shoot, and then a multitude of arrows began to fly at the monsters from above. These arrows hit the monsters, piercing their bodies. The knights were ordered to use their shields, and they held them up in front of them. A fierce battle began. The commander shouted that the third row was disorganized and ordered it to be corrected. He ordered the spearmen to remain in formation. Suddenly, someone rushed past him, and then that someone slashed the monster with his sword with a sharp movement of his arm. The knight noticed this person but did not recognize him. He saw his strange red robe, and then the protagonist turned to face him, and the knight joyfully exclaimed that it was the mercenary Monty. The knight shook his hand, thanked him, and said that it seemed the guy had gained some fame. Suddenly, the knight noticed that the guy looked familiar. which made him start. Kim Jun thought that he actually knew this NPC. It was him who had gotten to him at the beginning of the game. The knight asked the guy where they might have met, to which the guy simply replied that it was just a feeling. The man said that in any case, he was grateful, and it was very encouraging that he was an A-rank mercenary. Then he said that his squad would help him, to which the guy replied that they could count on him. He himself thought that the difference in levels between him and the monsters was almost twofold, and then he decided to use the lens of confidence. Using this technique, he was able to see the health bars of all the monsters, thinking that it was all thanks to the training items. As he chopped down the monster, he thought that now he was only aiming for critical hits. Kim Jun continued to swing his sword, killing the monsters around him. The knights admired his bravery. After all, he killed all these monsters so boldly and confidently. Suddenly, something flashed above the boy's head, and he turned his head toward the other monsters, and then saw the health levels of each participant in the battle, and made a decision. He jumped up to strike from above, thinking that anyone could kill them with a single blow. He thought that because of the seriousness of the situation, he couldn't form groups with NPCs, and therefore he wouldn't be able to gain experience unless he killed them himself. Suddenly, someone's paw struck the guy, but missed his shoulder. Kim Jun turned and plunged his sword into the monster's body. The knight remarked that he couldn't believe he was using a large sword, to which the mercenary replied that the guy was an A-rank mercenary. Suddenly, Kim Jun looked to the side and noticed a werewolf with low health. He put a green leaf in his mouth and thought that he hated the rabid werewolf. Then he suddenly jumped up, attacking the werewolf from above. Landing on the werewolf's back, the guy thrust his sword straight into the monster's neck, and the tip came out the other side. The knight whom the guy had saved thanked him, but suddenly he was pulled back. As it turned out, another monster was about to attack the man. But the guy quickly noticed this and, pushing the man away, struck the monster with his sword. The man fell to the ground in surprise, while Kim Jun noted that all this annoyed him and looked at the status windows showing the experience gained. Moving away from the man, he thought about turning off the status windows for a while. Meanwhile, the other knights continued their fierce battle. Kim Jun looked to the side and saw several mantises there with low health. He gripped his sword tighter and then quickly ran towards them, thinking that they were the very prey he was looking for. With a sharp movement of his arm, he swung his sword, striking the monsters' bodies and killing one of them. The boy killed the second one, and the knight fell to the ground, shouting that the attack was not too strong and that the monsters would strike back. Moving nimbly, Kim Jun replied that this would not be the case, and then he struck the third monster, killing it. The knight asked the boy why he was attacking like that. Then Kim Jun swung his sword around him, killing another monster. Then he plunged his sword into the last fifth monster, and immediately a smile appeared on his face. Then suddenly there was an explosion. The knights stared in surprise, not expecting the guy to use magic. They asked in surprise if this guy was a magic swordsman. The monsters were blown to pieces by the explosion, and the knights exclaimed that it seemed the rumor that he had received an imperial medal was true. A while ago, Kim Jun sat down on the ground, exhausted, and noted that he had finally reached level 100 and now had a new skill. Explosion. The guy started reading the skill description, and he was getting more and more surprised. Standing up, he asked again if he could really blow up to 5 characters he touched with the tip of his sword. Imagining this in his mind, Kim Jun began to think that such skills had a downside, as they could also affect the caster. Then an idea suddenly popped into his head, and he grinned at his own cleverness. As it turned out, Kim Jun had managed to find armor in his inventory that protected him from fire. The armor glistened in the sun, and the guy thought that now he was completely immune to explosions. And then he rushed forward to attack again. He ran forward quickly, swinging his sword, leaving a trail of explosions behind him. Now he was invulnerable to fire, but the monsters were very vulnerable. Suddenly, someone shouted that a huge monster had appeared on the battlefield, causing the guy to freeze. As it turned out, this huge monster was a level 150 guillotine bear. The bear roared loudly, and Kim Jun thought that it was much higher than the average level of the village, so it would be better to leave it to the guard troops and avoid the mercenaries. But suddenly, the knights exclaimed that they should leave this monster for Monty. The guy awkwardly said that such special treatment was unacceptable, and then he stepped forward and stood in front of the monster, saying that he was going to catch it anyway. The bear quickly rushed forward, raising its paw to strike. Reaching the guy, it struck with its huge paw where the guy had been standing, but he managed to dodge by jumping away. Then Kim Jun swung his sword, cutting the beast's face, causing blood to spurt in all directions. Suddenly, the monster froze, and Kim Jun thought that it might seem as if this monster was attacking recklessly, but it also had its habits. Then the bear lunged at the guy again, but he dodged again, noting that since the skin was thick, the damage from the explosion was minor. Kim Jun began to run away from the monster, thinking that in order to prepare for this, he focused on agility. Suddenly, he turned sharply and ran forward again while the bear pursued him, thinking he needed to jump into the crowd of monsters. Breaking into the crowd of monsters, Kim Jun began swinging his sword, sweeping them out of his way. He thought about the monsters chasing him, not realizing that their blood was being spilled in vain, but they were already quite close. Suddenly, the guy turned sharply and began to slow down, and, as it turned out, he had a small bottle in his hand, and with a smile on his face, he said goodbye to the bear. Then he threw the bottle at the bear, shattering it into pieces and sending liquid flying in all directions. The bear looked at his paws in confusion, and Kim Jun suddenly shouted sharply, using his new ability. Suddenly, the bear's entire body was engulfed in an explosion and flames, causing it to scream in pain. Kim Jun watched this scene with a smile. The fire disappeared, and the bear began to fall to the ground. Then it fell to the ground with a thud, kicking up dust, and the knights cheered joyfully. And Gigi looked into the distance. The monsters sitting in the forest, hiding from human eyes, were very frightened. Gigi drew his sword again, realizing that he was not done yet. Then Kim Jun pushed off the ground and jumped high into the air again, throwing himself at the crowd of monsters, and he exclaimed that art is an explosion. After a while, a carriage slowly drove down the road, and Gigi was riding in it. Suddenly, someone stopped the wagon and said there would be a brief inspection. The man walked on, looking into the wagon, and it seemed he recognized someone. He saw Kim Jun lying in the wagon, sprawled out on the hay. The man said happily that he had heard about his activities in the village of Evra, and then asked him if he was going to River North. Then the man said that it was an honor to meet him and that he looked forward to seeing him again. Kim Jun waved awkwardly and laughed. The wheel of the cart touched the ground, and the system announced that they had entered the Paramount Plain. Sitting in the carriage, Kim Jun thought that it seemed like just yesterday he had no idea how to survive as a level 10 character, and now he had already reached level 80. He called up the skill development window again and thought that choosing explosion had been the right decision. He thought that now he was heading to the North River storage facility for the Essence of Flame. There, he would be able to add items to his inventory upon reaching level 109. Scratching his chin, he wondered what else he needed to do. Then he turned to the driver and asked if he could ask a question, to which the man replied that he could ask anything. The guy asked if there was any news from the Empire. The man thought for a moment and grunted. Then he began to tell him that about 10 days ago, a group of bandits had raised an uprising, and the third prince was also recruiting troops. Kim Jun thought he remembered completing this quest with another character, and that he might have established a relationship with the third prince of the Empire. The driver said that where they were going, the number of missing persons was increasing, and the Lord was having a hard time. Kim Jun took out a silver coin and thought that it seemed like the plans had gone a little awry. He thanked the man for the information and gave him the coin, and then asked if he could give him a ride somewhere. And now they were almost there. Kim Jun got out of the carriage and took off his hood, noting that it bothered him to have to hide his identity. And then he began to gaze into the distance at some plain. Kim Jun thought that this place reminded him of some hidden quest, and he thought of the cave he had reached, that it was a slave trader's cave in the Tira Mountains bordering the plains. Hiding in the bushes, he thought that they were the reason for the disappearance of people in the North River area. He looked away, thinking that he was not going to get rid of them because of a particular sense of justice. His goal was the elixir of agility, which could be obtained by defeating the boss. Kim Jun pulled his hood back over his head. Meanwhile, two men were talking at the entrance to the cave. One said that it seemed like the deal had gone very well. The other replied that he would be able to rest when he was done. The first man replied that of course they could. While Kim Jun watched them from below, he suddenly took out a rope. The man shouted that they should have fun today. Suddenly, the rope began to wrap around his neck, and suddenly the rope pulled him back. Then Kim Jun jumped out of his hiding place like Spider-Man. With a wave of his hand, he pulled the rope, and the man whose neck it was wrapped around fell from the platform. Another man turned around and shouted to his companions that there was an intruder. But suddenly Kim Jun rushed forward and swinging his sword struck the man, causing a fountain of blood to spurt into the air. The man's lifeless body fell to the ground, and the boy thought in surprise that the average level of these men was 50, and so he didn't even have to use his skills. Suddenly, something behind him caught his attention. As it turned out, there was a cage behind him with a small bird sitting in it. Kim Jun approached the cage and opened the door, and the bird immediately flew out of it. Watching it fly away, the guy said that they needed to be careful, and the system notified him that he had entered a slave trader's hideout. Meanwhile, there were several other people sitting in the cave, and one of them asked why these picky slave traders were so generous. Another man, holding a mug of alcohol in his hand, replied that it didn't matter. The main thing was that they were getting a lot of money. Then the first man asked if the people from North River really couldn't find them, if it was because they were so well hidden. The second replied that there was no need to worry because the greedy nobles would not spend their money on a search. They would not even think of looking for this wide plain. Suddenly a barrel rolled forward. The man, still holding his mug in his hand, looked at it in surprise, breaking off his conversation. The other man got up from his seat and asked irritably which bastard dared to disturb his boss while he was drinking. Suddenly, Kim Jun smiled faintly and asked what the big deal was. He approached the men, holding his large sword on his shoulder, and asked if the men hadn't had enough to drink yet. Suddenly, someone's hand fell out of a barrel that rolled into the cave, making a soft thud on the stone floor. The men stared at it in surprise, and then they rushed to attack the guy with knives and fists, shouting that he was a scoundrel. Did he really think he could get out of there alive? The guy, still smiling, held his sword on his shoulder, when suddenly there was a flash of light. As it turned out, the guy quickly swung his sword, attacking the men who wanted to kill him. Others also tried to attack the guy, but they too were killed by Kim Jun. The body of one of the slave traders fell onto the stone floor right in front of their boss, causing him to stare in surprise. A slight tremor of anger ran through his body, and he frowned and clenched his jaw. Kim Jun lowered the tip of his sword, which was dripping with blood, and said that he had dealt with the rest along the way. He slung the sword back over his shoulder and told the man that he was now alone. He smirked and said that it was all so tiresome and that they should get it over with quickly. After a while, someone's bloody hand reached out desperately, and its owner cried out, begging for mercy. As it turned out, it was the slave trader boss himself. He lay on the floor, trembling slightly, and asked the young man what he wanted. The man tried to crawl further and further away from the young man, desperately shouting that he was only following orders. Kim Jun frowned as he looked at the man and thought that he knew this man had to die. He thought, however, that he felt uncertain, but still the guy raised his hand with the weapon, and he asked the man if he had ever felt sorry for someone who deserved to die. And then suddenly blood splattered everywhere. After searching around a bit, Kim Jun found a small key with blood dripping from it. Standing up, the guy looked around the room for the chest that the key belonged to. He crouched down in front of the chest, inserted the key into the keyhole, and turned it. The door opened, and Kim Jun took out a potion of agility, and the system announced that, thanks to the potion of agility, his stats had increased by 5. Kim Jun pulled the cork out of the bottle and began to drink its contents. After finishing it, he happily noted that he felt all his fatigue disappear, and the system notified him that his agility stat had increased by 5. Kim Jun told himself that it was time to get going, but suddenly he heard someone's voice asking if anyone was there. Feeling the cave wall with his palm, he thought he heard a voice coming through the wall. The guy scratched his chin and thought that the slave trade was over, so there shouldn't be anyone else here. But suddenly, an image of someone popped into his head. After wandering around the cave for a while, Kim Jun found the place he needed to go. He touched the cave wall with his hand and suddenly everything around him began to shake. A few seconds later, a passageway opened up right in front of him. Moving forward, Kim Jun looked around as he passed by cages in which people were sitting. These people were extremely thin and weak. They could barely hold their heads up. They were dressed in rags and looked more like the dead than the living. Covering his nose and mouth with his hand, Kim Jun noted that it was very difficult to look at, even though he had seen it in the game. He thought that if he had seen this for the first time, it would have been difficult for him to just walk away. Moving on, he remembered that there was another wooden door ahead. Kim Jun pushed the door and it creaked open, and he entered the next room. In this room, in some kind of magic circle, sat a girl. Her hair was white, and she was dressed in a white dress, her head bowed low, and her hands were resting on her knees. The guy was a little shocked. Hearing someone enter, the girl raised her head and looked at the stranger, and then she quietly asked him to kill her. When he saw the girl, Kim Jun was finally convinced that she was the one he had been thinking about. He remembered that a gang of thieves had sold this girl to a sorcerer, and this minor character was supposed to become a victim. Her older brother, Sigmund, was second in command of the North River Knights, and this incident was the reason for his appearance. This incident led to the appearance of the strongest swordsman of the Church of the Moon, also known as the Knight of Justice. The guy folded his arms across his chest and thought that the death of this girl named Sepia was therefore one of the most important events. And it wasn't that the players didn't try to save her, it was just that no one succeeded. No potion helped her break free because there is a status ailment called the Mark of Death. Taking his sword in his hands, Kim Jun thought that this girl was considered a character whose death was inevitable. Sepia repeated her request once more. Kim Jun looked at her, frowning slightly, and thought that this was his chance. Kim Jun called up the system windows, which informed him that his skill, Oath of Liberation, made a pact of liberation. And if the target accepted the oath, all of their deviations would be neutralized and the caster's stamina would be spent. After that, the target would become dependent on the caster, and 10% of his stats would be spent with each pact. Kim Jun's gaze lingered on the words that all deviations in the target's status were neutralized. He thought that he did not yet know if this skill could remove the mark of death, but for some reason, he was sure it was possible. However, there was one problem, namely that 10% of the target's stats would be consumed. Frowning, the guy wondered if it was worth taking such a risk to subjugate, but suddenly he came to his senses, and his eyes widened. He asked himself what he had just been thinking about. He thought about what was in the game, but he must not forget that this was now his reality. He caught himself thinking that a person was suffering before his eyes, while he stood there, lost in his thoughts. And he immediately remembered how he had cut down the slave traders without remorse. Even after finishing off the gang leader, gritting his teeth, he thought that he was not like them at all. He was not a monster. Suddenly, Kim Jun dropped to one knee as he approached the girl. He looked at her seriously and said he would save her. The girl looked at him in surprise, and he told her that there was a way to lift her curse. He spread his arms and asked her what they should do, after being in shock for a while, or rather in complete confusion about what was about to happen. Sepia finally gathered her thoughts and nodded silently, her face looking determined. Kim Jun smiled in response and held out his hand to her. The girl placed her hand, bound by a chain, in the guy's hand. The system reported that a level 1 Oath of Liberation had been used, and the subject had accepted the contract, and suddenly everything around them was flooded with bright light. The system informed him that stamina was consumed depending on the status condition, and if the guy ran out of stamina, the contract could become invalid, and it asked if he wanted to continue, to which Kim Jun immediately replied yes. And in the next second, the light became even brighter. Kim Jun closed one eye and clenched his teeth, asking what the hell was going on. Meanwhile, the light became even brighter, filling the entire room and blinding the guy and the girl. The system announced that a hidden quest to rescue Sepia had been detected. After a while, Kim Jun slowly opened his eyes. He remembered that the light had escaped from his hand, and suddenly a hidden quest had appeared. But, as it turned out, the guy woke up not in the room, but in some kind of hell. Somewhere, a whole crowd of monsters was running, some of them flying from above. Knights in golden armor were running towards them. Suddenly, Kim Jun noticed a pattern on the helmet. He thought he had never seen such a pattern before. Suddenly, a three-headed dog appeared somewhere. Something exploded in the dog's mouth, and Kim Jun thought that if this continued, he would lose. But suddenly, a bright flash appeared somewhere above, blinding two heads at once. The boy also noticed the glow in shock. Then a girl appeared in the sky. She looked like a beautiful angel. Suddenly, Kim Jun noticed that the direction of her gaze was directed straight at him. The girl closed her eyes and blessed the guy, telling him that the glow would come with him. But in the next second, Kim Jun suddenly got up from his place on the floor, asking what that was. Standing up and sitting down, he saw that Sepia was lying on the floor in front of him in a magic circle. He grabbed his head and looked at the girl, and later wondered if this vision was related to this girl. This led Kim Jun to assume that Sepia was not just a minor character. Suddenly, system windows appeared, mentioning a secret quest called Save Sepia. The system reported that the amount of stamina absorbed by the oath was 90%, and the loss of the caster's characteristics after taking the oath was 10%. The system asked Kim Jun if he would continue the contract, to which he agreed without hesitation. The system reported that the player's strength was beginning to wane, and the boy's body was enveloped in a kind of glow. This glow also enveloped the body of the girl, who was still unconscious on the floor. Kim Jun thought he was beginning to feel a surge of strength. But then he coughed up blood, and he raised his hand to stop the flow, and the system notified him that the player's health was below 10%. However, the guy's hand couldn't stop the blood that continued to spurt from his mouth, and he wondered if he had really overestimated himself. Saying how much pain he was in, he thought that it wasn't just the numbers that were falling, but the pain was spreading throughout his body. Meanwhile, Sepia woke up and slowly opened her eyes. Kim Jun's body was trembling slightly at that moment. He raised his hand to wipe away the blood and noticed that the pain was disappearing, and that this red energy was so warm and gentle. As it turned out, it was Sepia's doing, who had fallen unconscious again, and the guy wondered why she was doing this for him. A drop of blood ran down the guy's chin as he pressed his hand to his chest, and the system notified him that he had successfully completed the secret quest by saving Sepia, and that his Oath of Liberation skill had been upgraded to level 2. Slowly getting to his feet, the guy said how terribly painful it was, and there was a pool of blood on the floor in front of his feet. Then he took the girl and threw her arm over his shoulder, and grabbing her by the waist, he began to leave the room, saying that he needed to take her to a safe place. The girl, still unconscious, was dreaming. Turning around, she noticed the guy, and she asked him if he was her brother. The silhouette did not answer, but simply held out his hand silently. The girl looked at the guy and thought that he was not her brother, because her brother had silver hair. However, she was not afraid of him at all, quite the contrary. Suddenly, Sepia opened her eyes and sat up abruptly, touching her head with her hand. She noticed that her head was now clear, and she felt no pain at all. When was the last time she felt this good? Looking ahead, she saw Kim Jun lying on his side, with several empty glass bottles in front of him and traces of blood on the ground. Slowly crawling toward him, she wondered why this man had risked himself to save her. Maybe her brother had sent him. She looked closely at his face and noted that the guy didn't look like a knight from North River. Besides, his sword was completely clean, so he was clearly not sent by her brother. Then Kim Jun slowly opened his eyes. The girl, who was very close to him, widened her eyes in surprise. Her face flushed red, and she immediately jumped back. Kim Jun sat up with an impassive expression and thought to himself in surprise that he had somehow managed to doze off. After a while, having regained his composure, Kim Jun reached out his hand to the girl and introduced himself with a smile, saying his name was Dio. Sepia looked away, weakly reached out her hand in response, introduced herself, and then thanked him for saving her. Looking at the guy, she decided to ask if he had come here at her brother's request. Kim Jun paused for a moment without answering the question, thinking to himself that there was no information about Sepia because she was a character who simply disappeared from the game. All he knew about her was that she was a victim and Sigmund's younger sister. He thought that even if he pretended to know Sepia or Sigmund, it would only make things more confusing. And so, after a long silence, he asked her who her brother was. The girl looked away, embarrassed, her cheeks still red, and quietly asked him why he had saved her. Kim Jun swallowed nervously and thought about the question the girl wanted to ask, namely, why he risked his life to save someone he had never seen before. And then he decided it was better to remain silent. But Kim Jun couldn't keep quiet and said he wanted to hear words of gratitude. After a while, they were still sitting in their little camp by the fire, and Kim Jun thought it was all strange. What was strange was that they had already talked a little, but it turned out that the girl didn't remember anything. He thought about how Sepia had signed a contract with him and submitted to him, and therefore she would have many restrictions for a long time. Then he looked at the system window and saw that she had characteristics of submission, obedience, solidarity, and destruction. He thought that obedience meant suffering when disobeying orders. Solidarity meant suffering when going beyond a certain distance, and destruction meant death when breaking an oath. His face warmed a little, but then he smiled crookedly, thinking that the restrictions were much stricter than he had thought. However, if they had not taken this oath, the girl would have died a painful death, and so the boy thought that he should not blame himself for her being under his control. He decided that he needed to explain everything to her quickly so that she wouldn't worry, and then he asked the girl again about her brother Sigmund being a knight, and then announced that he had then accompanied her to North River. Sepia looked away and wanted to say something, but couldn't bring herself to do so, which made the guy think that she still didn't trust him. He frowned slightly, noting that to her he still looked like an ordinary slave trader, and then he suddenly held out his hand to her and told her to take it. The girl was a little taken aback by this request, and then Kim Jun said it was an order, and both his and the girl's eyes lit up with a yellow glow, and Sepia, without hesitation, quickly took the guy's hand in both of her hands. After recovering from the spell's effect, she asked in confusion what it was and why. Kim Jun pulled his hand away and then told her that they were now bound by an oath and that she was his subordinate. The girl pressed her hand to her chest, and the guy continued, saying that a subordinate suffers if they do not obey orders, and that it was not up to him personally, because they had made this oath to each other. He said he had to do it to save her, and that's how it would be from now on, even if she was against it. Kim Jun finished speaking, frowned, and looked at the ground, thinking that the girl probably wouldn't want to follow an unknown stranger. And even if she reunited with her brother, she would have to leave him again to go with her new master. But to the guy's surprise, the system reported that Sepia's trust had increased by 3 points, and the girl said that she already owed him her life, so she was ready to follow him. With a smile on his face, Kim Jun noted that he was glad she understood and accepted everything so quickly. And then they decided to go to North River as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the man asked his trembling subordinate, who was lying bent over on the floor and trembling, if the victim had really disappeared. The subordinate raised his head and replied that when he arrived there, all the gangsters were already dead. In response, the man raised his hand sharply, causing the chains to wrap around the other man's body. The irritated man asked if he knew how important it was to keep an eye on the victim, and with that, the chains tightened around his subordinate's body, causing blood to gush from his mouth. The man thought that at first the girl had been captured only to deal with the annoying Sigmund, but she turned out to be an archmage, which immediately changed their intentions towards her. And if they let her go, the number of victims would increase from 3 to 7. In a rage, the man raised his weapon, ready to strike. After a while, another man in a cassock ran into the hall and exclaimed that they had found the place of sacrifice, which meant that they were not far from the cave. A man named Victor strode forward confidently and told them to follow him, saying that he would wring the neck of the bastard who had taken their victim with his own hands. Meanwhile, the sun was already setting, and Kim Jun sat down on a rock and began to think that Sepia's health had not yet fully recovered, which was why she was moving slowly. The guy had a bad feeling that they needed to get out of this place as soon as possible. As it turned out, Sepia called out to the guy, and upon hearing this, Kim Jun flinched and snapped out of his thoughts. The girl said that he had told her he was a wandering mercenary, and then she bombarded him with questions about where he got such power, because she had never heard of such a curse being lifted, and she knew that not everyone could take the oath. Kim Jun thought she was asking questions just to gather strength, and he replied incoherently, saying that he had received this power in some temple. However, Sepia didn't really believe it, and the system reported that her trust had decreased by 1 point. Noticing this, Kim Jun thought with annoyance that he had just raised her trust level to the maximum. He told her to tell him how she had been captured. The girl, without looking at the guy, asked him if it was an order. Kim Jun threw up his hands and exclaimed that of course it wasn't. He said she didn't have to tell him if she didn't want to. Sepia raised her hand to her face, hiding a smile, and thought that maybe this guy wasn't as bad as she thought, and her trust increased by 1 point. Then she said she had nothing to hide from the man who had saved her. But suddenly, Kim Jun grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward him. They hugged almost. Not understanding what was happening, Sepia asked why he had grabbed her so suddenly, but the guy just told her to look behind her. And the girl turned her head and saw some kind of dark mark that was almost in the same place where she had been standing before. Noticing this mark, she exclaimed that she knew this dark energy. As it turned out, this dark energy was the same one she had felt in the room where she had been held. Victor stepped forward, surrounded by his subordinates, and said that it looked like he was going to have problems. Kim Jun quietly said Victor's name, and Victor asked him if he knew him. Then he noted that the guy recognized his mark. Kim Jun stepped forward, shielding Sepia, and the man said that this guy, who looked as neat as a nobleman, touched what belonged to him without any fear. With a smirk on his face, Kim Jun replied, telling him to take it however he wanted. And the guy threw something at the man with a sharp swing of his arm. As it turned out, they were wooden blocks with a red symbol painted on them. And then, when these blocks touched their targets, they exploded. Kim Jun smiled and noted that Victor also had such power. As it turned out, these explosions had no effect on the man. He asked the young man if it was funny. Kim Jun thought that the man did not have any serious injuries after all. He was a third circle wizard. However, Victor had not yet reached the 5th circle by placing Sepia on the altar as a sacrifice. And the 3rd circle was equal in power to his 80th level. And so the guy thought he could win, but in the meantime, something was flying at him. Tilting his head slightly to the side, Kim Jun managed to dodge the swift attack. Then he rushed forward with the sword that was resting on his shoulder. Victor's subordinate, who was casting spells, noted with irritation that the guy was faster than he thought. But in the next second, Kim Jun was face to face with the man. Then, with a sharp movement of his arm, he swung his sword, striking the man in the chest, causing blood to gush out. Another subordinate responded by folding his hands to cast a protective spell. But that didn't stop the guy, and he struck the shield. As it turned out, the spellcaster's shield cracked from the blow, and Kim Jun's sword went further, cutting through the man's chest. Victor's other subordinates cried out that they needed to protect their boss until the magic circle was complete. But Kim Jun threw his wooden blocks again, causing explosions to thunder near the men. Jumping up to attack other opponents, the guy noticed that there were 3 more ahead of him. He swung his sword again, cutting deep into the chest of one of them, noting that there were still 2 left. He swung his arm sharply to the side, cutting another man's body in 2, and noting that there was 1 left. Meanwhile, Victor raised his hand, and a glowing sphere appeared around it. Glowing lines crept through the air. A magic arrow was sent forward, and the man said that this spell would pursue its target to the end, no matter how far it ran. And the man joyfully exclaimed that now it was over. However, the man's spell did not reach its target, because the guy covered himself with something black. With a smile on his face, Kim Jun took a deep breath, and it turned out that he had covered himself with Victor's subordinate. He remarked mockingly that, fortunately, the blow had not hit him. Then he said that the sorcerer's ability to aim would hit him. Victor cried out in annoyance, and flashes of light appeared from his body, filling the space around him. With a smile on his face, Kim Jun decided to use the explosion again and said how stupid it was, asking if he could hit him with a flash. Then, with a sharp movement, he threw something engulfed in flames at the man, and noted that since it was only the third circle, the spell worked slowly. Victor responded irritably, saying that if he had sepia, he would have already reached the seventh circle. Kim Jun frowned and said that the man's limit was only 5 circles, no more. This angered Victor even more, and he began to conjure some kind of glowing sphere at his chest. Kim Jun jumped up again, with his sword in his hand to attack the man, and he decided to hit him with an explosion again. The explosion reached the man's body, and a bright flash appeared in front of the guy. The man's entire body was immediately engulfed in flames. Landing on the ground, Kim Jun stood up to get closer to the man engulfed in flames, wanting to finish him off. But suddenly something made him stop halfway. Looking at Victor, who was screaming in pain, he wondered what this strange feeling was. He noticed that his explosion skill was indeed a flame skill, but now it looked a little different. Meanwhile, tears were streaming down Sepia's cheeks, and she sighed. The guy immediately looked back at her and was shocked by what he saw. Her eyes were shining, her arms were crossed over her chest, and the outline of flames could be seen around her body. The guy was shocked by such a change. The girl shouted that now it was the man's turn to suffer, and flashes of light illuminated the space around them, and chains flew forward. These chains began to wrap around Victor's body, and then squeezed him tightly, causing him to scream even louder. Tears were still streaming down the girl's cheeks, but a smile flitted across her face, and she stretched out her arms, tightening the chains tighter and tighter. The fire burning the man's body grew even stronger. The chains tightened even more, and he begged her to stop. Kim Jun watched all this with surprise on his face. Seeing this scene, he realized that it was Ego's magic, NPC magic that could only be found in later versions, and only those who had risen to the rank of the strongest could use it. Kim Jun, still in shock, turned to look at the girl, amazed that she could use such magic. But suddenly the girl's eyes closed, her face relaxed, and she began to fall to the ground, losing consciousness. However, Kim Jun managed to run up and catch her. Pulling her closer, he thought he was wrong, thinking that she couldn't control her abilities yet because she had done perfectly well. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the door to the office suddenly swung open, and someone turned to the vice captain and said they had found a clue. As it turned out, this vice captain was Sigmund, the youngest deputy commander of the Northern River. His subordinate reported that he had noticed a trail on the border in the Tyr Mountains, and continued by saying that it seemed that slave traders were involved in the case, which made the young man's face darken. He clenched his fist tightly, shouting, "How dare those bastards!" Then he waved his hand sharply, ordering his subordinate that they must find them immediately. When his subordinate left, the guy was alone in the room, and he sadly said his sister's name. After a while, Sepia had recovered, and they continued on their way. And she looked back and asked the guy if this was the right way. Turning around, he replied that of course it was. He told her that he knew a shortcut to the North River. As they moved on, the boy noticed that the girl still doubted him, and that he was just trying to find the way without a map or compass. He didn't want to lose her trust, so he should have kept quiet. But he thought he would have to protect the girl, so he didn't expect her to be so strong. Seeing the girl on his back after the battle, he looked at her stats window, which was normal, but her class was still hidden. The guy guessed that maybe she had the same abilities as her older brother Sigmund. With a smile on his face, he pointed somewhere ahead with his hand and said that they would arrive at North River very soon. Sepia responded briefly, and the guy couldn't think of anything else to say. Turning his back, he thought that he needed to win her trust before she asked about her abilities. And if he wasn't careful, he might even die. The guy thought he had seen another side of her and wondered how he could now learn more about the girl, and decided that he had to try to win their trust. After a while, Kim Jun raised his voice and called the girl by name. Turning around, he said with a serious look on his face, and said he needed to tell her something, and then asked her if she was a heretic. This question provoked a negative reaction from the girl, and the system reported that her trust had dropped by 5 points. Meanwhile, a girl was walking within the walls of Atron Cathedral. Her red hair, braided into 2 ponytails, swayed behind her with every step. A man in blue robes put his hand on his chest and thanked the girl for her work. As it turned out, this girl was Clara, and she accepted his gratitude with a smile. The man told her to follow him, which she did, and she began to admire the cathedral's interior. After a while, they reached some doors, and the man told Clara to be careful, even though she had already finished her training. And then she entered a huge hall. In front of her was a throne with someone sitting on it and a blue carpet leading to it. Clara awkwardly approached, then bowed politely, touching the carpet with her knee, and greeted her Grace Luna. The woman sitting on the throne told Clara to look up. As it turned out, Saint Kalanaya Luna was sitting on the throne, and she thanked the girl for her work. Clara looked at her in surprise, still bowing. Saint Luna tapped her finger lightly on the armrests of the throne and said that the girl must already know why she had called her here. Then she said that she had heard that the girl had visited the Forgotten Temple, to which Clara replied openly that this was true. And then the woman told her to tell her everything. She asked her to tell her everything she had seen and heard. After a while, Clara told her about the death of the Knight of Death, and then she returned to the village. After these words, the woman interrupted the girl's story, saying that she could stop there. Then she said that Clara had done a good job and had been very helpful to the order. Therefore, the diocese would provide appropriate compensation, and the blessing of the moon would continue to light her way. Clara joyfully thanked the woman, and then immediately left the room. Saint Moon tapped her fingers on the armrests of the throne again, lost in thought. Frowning, she turned her head slightly and called someone named Paul. Immediately, a man appeared behind her, who was the Archbishop of the Lunar Church, and he asked the woman if she had called him. The woman said that there was no lie in the priest's words, but something was bothering her. In response, Paul nodded and said that the name Monty was completely fictitious. In response, the woman ordered the man to send a personal letter to Port River, and it seemed that she would have to keep an eye on this guy. Meanwhile, Sepia asked Kim Jun why he thought she was a heretic, and said that most likely the heretics were those who kidnapped her. Kim Jun replied that those they call heretics must have something in common, and that commonality is the pursuit of power, not faith. And the power that the girl had demonstrated was simply incredible. The girl froze in shock and asked again. Frowning, she lowered her gaze and thought about how she had always suspected him of something, and so she didn't even know how to respond to him now. She swallowed nervously, thinking that, judging by the guy's abilities, there was a possibility that he was an inquisitor heretic of the Holy Emperor of the Moon Church. And then Sepia quietly said that she would tell him everything. She recounted that in her youth she often lost consciousness, and her magical power was out of control. So she turned to magicians, who told her what was wrong with her, but they never found a solution to the problem. Kim Jun asked the girl if she could control magic at will, to which she replied that although it was hard to believe, it was true. But it was definitely not the power of the devil, because during her escape she had used the magic of fire and light. Kim Jun put his hand on his chin and tilted his head to one side, lost in thought, and he remembered the vision he had seen when they signed the contract with her. And so he wondered if she really had divine powers. Sepia cried out, asking him to believe her, and said that even though she looked scary, she would not cause any harm. Kim Jun, feeling a headache coming on, thought about how she had hurt Victor, and so he wondered if she had done it because she had lost her memory, or if she wasn't human at all. The guy looked at the girl and noted that she had started telling the story too suddenly, and so perhaps he had frightened her. The girl's face darkened, and she looked away and asked him if he was the Holy Emperor's inquisitor. Kim Jun waved his hands and pointed out that he had said he was just a mercenary. Hearing this, Sepia asked again, somewhat surprised. Then she asked him if he was from the east, to which the guy asked why she thought so. He asked her what difference it made where he was from, to which the girl replied that, according to rumors, many people from Songhuangshan come from other countries. Hearing this, Kim Jun grabbed his head, realizing what she meant, and he confidently declared that he hated heretics. The Holy Emperor's heretic inquisitor possesses such great power that he is called the First Moon. However, the clan itself is not so powerful. If there is even the slightest suspicion of heresy, the righteous person will be immediately imprisoned. And Kim Jun told Sepia that if he were an inquisitor, he would kill her at the first suspicion. And then he asked her, since they would soon be there, perhaps he should not tell her about their agreement. Turning his back to her, he said it would be better that way, as he didn't want to tell her brother that he had subjugated her. Sepia agreed. Looking at the girl, the guy said that she wouldn't be able to get rid of him anyway, so it would be better for her to pretend that he was just accompanying her. The girl replied that her brother would not let her go if she said that. He would worry and would not send her with him. In response, the guy asked if that wasn't better than saying she was his subordinate. Pressing her hand to her chest, Sepia asked the guy to make her just one promise. She asked him to be sure to say that she was now a subordinate if her brother still didn't want to let her go. She told him that her brother had grown up in the slums and risen to the rank of deputy commander, and she hoped he wouldn't give his life for her, lose his honor and the rank he had worked so hard to earn because of her. Kim Jun scratched the back of his head and thought that, to be honest, he thought he would be happy to see Sigmund. Resigned to the situation, Kim Jun turned around and, with a smile on his face, promised that he would do just that. He told her that they should leave now and that the city was just around the corner, but then his gaze caught something to the side. As it turned out, several people were rushing forward on horseback below, making their way through the dust. Sepia looked at them and noticed the flag of the Knights of the North River, and then she ran joyfully toward these people. Kim Jun had no choice but to run after her. With a smile on her face, Sepia ran faster and faster. Kim Jun ran after her, telling her to be careful, and thought that his sister and brother hadn't seen each other for so long that even he was worried. Sigmund rode forward quickly on his horse with a sword in his hand, and the boy thought it would be good if he could convince him. However, Sigmund's eyes burned with rage. This sight somewhat disturbed Kim Jun. Sigmund continued to rush forward furiously and shouted for the boy to die. Then he aimed the blade of his sword directly at Kim Jun, but Kim Jun managed to draw his sword and block the blow. Flying backward from the blow, he asked irritably why he had been suddenly attacked. However, Sigmund's momentum was too strong, and Kim Jun fell to the ground. The guy forcefully stuck his sword into the ground, and, as it turned out, Sigmund dismounted his horse and walked straight up to Kim Jun while he waved his arms and said that there had been a misunderstanding. However, the other man did not listen to the explanation at all. He simply swung his sword with the intention of killing the boy. The blade of the sword passed right over Kim Jun's head, but he managed to dodge it by bending backward, but the sword still caught his hair. The next blow was not long in coming, but it also missed its target because he blocked it with his sword. Sigmund swung his arms with force, sending Kim Jun flying backward and knocking the sword out of his hands. And as it turned out, the guy's sword strike hit his cheek. Already sitting on the ground, the boy clenched his teeth and looked back. Behind him, he saw several knights on horseback holding flags, as well as ordinary knights standing at the ready, and behind them stood Sepia. Turning his head back, he smiled crookedly and thought that he had not expected any help. Clutching his sword tightly with both hands, he got up from the ground, thinking that Sigmund was clearly not ready yet. Then he thrust his sword into the ground with force, and a barrier appeared around him. However, this did not stop Sigmund, and he rushed forward, asking what kind of nonsense the guy was talking about. But his blow landed on the ground because Kim Jun managed to dodge it by jumping up, and then the guy flew down, kicking the knight in the chest. However, this was not enough to defeat him, and Kim Jun landed on the ground nearby. Sigmund noted that it was the first time he had seen such precise technique, but suddenly his eyes lit up yellow and he asked about it. However, something suddenly flew into the guy's temple, stopping his attack. Sigmund turned around irritably and asked who had done it. As it turned out, it was Sepia, who was now looking seriously at her brother, her hands on her hips. Sigmund asked in shock why his sister had done that, and Kim Jun thought that the guy was obviously shocked, and that it was probably because they were close relatives. Sepia pointed her finger at her brother in annoyance and exclaimed, asking if he had gone mad and wanted to kill her too. Both Kim Jun and Sigmund looked at the girl in shock, while her brother asked what he was talking about. Realizing that she had spoken too soon, Sepia brought her hand to her face. She covered her mouth with both hands, and Sigmund, spreading his arms, asked her what it all meant. After a while, they finally reached the city of North River. As it turned out, Kim Jun had already told them about himself, and Sigmund asked the young man how he had arrived from the east, cured Sepia of her curse using Eastern magic, and dealt with all those magicians. Sigmund asked if he had understood everything correctly, to which Kim Jun replied that he had. Looking at the guy, Sepia thought that he was lying so confidently, but there was nothing she could do if they wanted to convince her brother. Putting his hand on his chest, Sigmund apologized to Kim Jun for attacking him so suddenly, and then he remarked that it was surprising that he was so strong. But he asked if everyone from the Eastern continent was like that. Kim Jun thought that, as expected, it wasn't so easy to get rid of doubts. Placing his hand on his chest, he replied that if he could cross the sea to reach them, he had enough strength to stand up for himself. He also noted that Sepia's curse had not yet been completely cured. He said that as a temporary remedy, he had used a treatment from the Eastern continent, but it was not so easy to save Sepia from the curse. Clenching his fist on his leg, Sigmund asked if there was a way to completely cure his sister. Kim Jun smiled and replied that of course there was, and he confidently declared that he was the best in the East and therefore could do it. Sepia stared in complete shock at the guy who was lying so brazenly. Kim Jun said that there had been a similar case in his hometown, and they called it an intangible poison. Treatment requires constant monitoring of the patient's condition because the prescribed medications are constantly changing, and it would take a long time to find them. Sigmund asked the guy what would happen then. In response, Kim Jun said that Sepia would have to go with him. The knight jumped up from the sofa and shouted that he would not allow it, and that he just needed to get the medicine. Shaking his head, Kim Jun said that, unfortunately, without him, they would not be able to find the medicine, and if they delayed the search, it would only get worse. In response, the guy cried out that even so, he couldn't let Syria go. Finally, the girl gently touched her brother's hand and called him, assuring him that everything was fine and that she would definitely return. Sigmund turned to look at his sister in confusion, and Kim Jun just sighed wearily. Taking her by the hand, Sepia's brother told her to go to her room and rest, as she had been tired for a long time, and he would talk to the master alone. The girl agreed with a smile on her face and said that she was so happy to be able to spend time with her brother after so long. Then she got up from her seat and started to leave the room, passing by Kim Jun. At that very moment, the guy grabbed the girl by the wrist, stopping her. He gently took her hand and said with a smile that he wanted to check her wrist, and then he mentally told her not to go far and to keep pretending to be sick, and that he had already written a farewell letter to Sigmund. Letting go of the girl's hand, he said aloud that everything was fine and that he would visit her regularly. Sepia left the room, slamming the door behind her, and now only Sigmund and Kim Jun remained in the room. Sigmund crossed his legs and said that there was no need for formalities now, and then he told the guy with a threatening look that if he didn't like something, he should do as he pleased. In response, Kim Jun just smiled and said what a coincidence, he was going to say the same thing. Sigmund crossed his arms over his chest and asked the guy who he was. Kim Jun thought that his previous answer would clearly not satisfy him, so he needed to answer honestly. Smiling, he said his name was Dio and that he made a living as a mercenary. During this, the knight asked the young man if he had a mercenary squad, to which the other replied that he was just about to form one in North River. Sigmund then asked how he could believe that the curse could be lifted. Kim Jun thought that the curse had already been lifted and that his sister was now bound to him by a pact of submission. But that was not something he could tell her enraged brother, so he said that, as he had already mentioned, he had experience in lifting curses. Sigmund smirked and objected that this was completely unreasonable, and then he asked him why he risked his life, and Kim Jun's hands, which had been resting calmly on his knees, began to tremble. This question made the guy lower his gaze, and he couldn't find anything to say. Remembering everything that had happened, and scratching the back of his head, he wondered why it was so difficult for him to answer this question. He thought about how the last time Sepia asked him, he gave an answer, but this time he only replied that he didn't know. And then he asked the guy if he needed a reason to save someone. Sigmund looked at him intently, and then raised his hand to cover his lips, and said that he didn't know if he could trust him with his sister because the guy was too suspicious. Kim Jun thought Sigmund's question was reasonable, and as a level 10 character, he wouldn't be able to honestly explain his actions. Meanwhile, the knight continued, saying that the guy had saved Sepia, who had been kidnapped by the Black Mage, and that he knew about the curse, which he hadn't told anyone about. And the guy with a serious face asked Kim Jun again if he could really save Sepia. Kim Jun replied that he was willing to bet that he was the only one on the continent who could do it, and then he suggested that the guy ask Archbishop Luna about it. Sigmund clenched his fists tightly and replied that he did not trust them. Kim Jun scratched his chin and noted that Sigmund did not trust the Moon Church, and he knew this, so he asked about it on purpose. I wonder, comparing him to the Moon Church, who would he choose? So Kim Jun wondered if he should make a few more moves to tip the scales in his favor. Kim Jun spread his arms and noted that people were disappearing in North River, and he could help figure it out, and the guy thought that in order to win the man's trust, he had to demonstrate his abilities. Turning away, Sigmund asked the guy how a stranger could help him. In response, the young man said only one word, alley. And at that word alone, the knight's eyes lit up with an unkind fire, and the tip of his sword immediately pointed toward the young man's face, who was sitting calmly on the sofa. And now they stood silently facing each other. The blade of the sword barely grazed his skin, leaving a small cut on Kim Jun's cheek, and he smiled and told the vice captain to calm down. Sigmund looked at the guy with a darkened face, and noted that he seemed unhappy with what he knew about everything. Pushing the blade of his sword aside with one finger, Kim Jun continued, saying that the number of missing persons had increased recently, and that the criminal North River Alley was to blame. Standing up from the sofa next to the young man, he asked him where the vice captain had started looking for his missing sister. Passing by, he noticed that the alley must be in complete disarray right now. Kim Jun continued, saying that the back streets of this city were so dangerous that even the knights can't do anything about it. And he had also heard that the city is known for its powerful factions. He said that, however, they had nothing to do with the sepia incident, so there might be problems in the future, to which Sigmund replied only that the guy was right. Kim Jun said that since the guy didn't trust him, he would show him what he was capable of. And in response, the other asked about his talent. Kim Jun smiled and replied that he knew everything about the world. After a while, everything seemed to calm down. As it turned out, Sigmund and Kim Jun were discussing a plan to clean up the alley, and the former noticed that it was a very detailed plan, and therefore it did not seem like he had just come up with it. So he asked if it was really his first time in the city. Kim Jun replied that in his youth, he had been a military medic and had also tried his hand at being a detective. He said he had no bad intentions, so why shouldn't he be trusted? Sigmund looked seriously at the table without answering, and after a while he asked the guy what he wanted. When Kim Jun left Sigmund's office, the knight thought again that the guy was a detective. Even if he had heard about the alley in another city, he wouldn't have been able to guess everything that was going on. Alley was really quite annoying. Could he really help solve this problem? Leaning on the table, Sigmund quietly said that, no matter what, the guy couldn't be completely trusted. The next day, Kim Jun walked among the crowds, through the bustling streets of the city and its market. Looking back, he noted that everything in the game was the same as before. When he reached a certain place, he thought that this place appeared after passing through the busy shopping street. And finally, he reached the alley, the road leading to the criminal world. The guy thought that since he had already played in North River, he remembered the story with the alley well, but he was still a little scared. There were two factions in the world, one of which was the liberal Golden Dawn faction. The other was the extremist group, the Bloody Howl. As the plot unfolded, the Bloody Howl took a dominant position, and in the end, Sigmund dealt with the alley for the death of his sister. However, this time Sapia survived, so Sigmund would not touch Alley, and the Flood Boy did not know how the plot would unfold. However, the answer lies in the plot itself. He looked up at a sign and thought that Golden Dawn had been defeated by blood battle because it had suffered greatly at the hands of Sigmund. And so it was time to unite them, and the guy headed for the Golden Dawn building. When he got there, he was met by a huge man named Ludens, who laughed loudly, saying he couldn't believe that the guy had been sent by Sigmund, who hadn't even apologized before. With a smile on his face, Kim Jun said that now they wouldn't have to wander the back alleys. The guy noted that even after taking a lot of damage, the man still greeted him with a smile, and that even though he was the leader of a liberal group, he was still a criminal. Kim Jun headed for the door, expressing hope that they would get along, and the man said goodbye to the guy. Kim Jun left the building, slamming the door behind him. Leaning against the door, the guy noted that half the work was done. All that remained was the NPC's inventory. After a while, someone somewhere in the sewers used a sword to kill rats with knives. One of the rats rushed forward with a loud squeak. In response, Kim Jun took a step back, and then drew his sword on the huge rat. But another rat decided to attack him from behind. However, before it could strike, it was immediately cut in two. As it turned out, it was Kim Jun who swung his sword sharply, and the dead body fell to the floor. Looking at the stats window, Kim Jun noted that even though he had obtained the essence of flame, his skill had not changed much. Meanwhile, another rat decided to attack the guy from the side. However, the main character didn't even bat an eye. Suddenly, a glowing shield appeared around him, which took the blow. Then the shield disappeared, and the guy swung his sword, delivering a blow. A red mark remained on the body of the rat, which flew away to its fellow rats. Kim Jun shouted, calling for an explosion. And immediately an explosion flashed before him, deafening him with a shockwave and warming him with the heat of the exploded rat bodies. Suddenly, someone in blue clothes ran up behind him and asked if he was okay. Turning around, Kim Jun told Priest Krupus that he was fine, and he thought about how his fire resistance had been increased thanks to the salamander set. The priest noted that the guy was so strong that the explosion spell could destroy his shield. As it turned out, Kim Jun had met this priest after starting the quest. He had originally planned to do it alone, but thought it would be a good idea to take him along. The priest thanked the guy with a smile on his face. Kim Jun replied that thanks to him, he was able to settle everything quickly. And they decided that they had gone far enough and dealt with all the winged people. Kim Jun turned and said goodbye to the priest, preparing to leave first. Krupus bid him farewell, blessing him, and the guy quickly went further into the sewer, moving away from the man. But suddenly the priest smiled strangely and crookedly. He took out a piece of paper and read the description. a mercenary who wields a sword and uses explosive magic. And the man noted that he seemed to have found the one the Archbishop was looking for. A few hours later, evening had already fallen. The men in the alley wondered if this was the bastard they were looking for. Another replied that Kim Jun fit the description. And then he noted that the guy was a scout for the Golden Dawn. Kim Jun thought that the rumor about him had spread quickly, which was to be expected. Coming closer, the bald man asked the guy if he was too cocky and told him not to relax since he had joined the Golden Dawn. Then he grabbed the sword that was in the sheath on his back. As it turned out, these men were from the Bloodhowl. The guy looked at him seriously at first. Then he smiled and thought that he had already reached level 90. After that, he said with a smile on his face that he just wanted to see their boss. And if they wanted to get hurt, then let them attack. This phrase angered the men, and they rushed at him with shouts and attacks. A gust of wind blew the hood off the guy's head, revealing his smile. After a while, the scene shifted to a quiet house. Suddenly, something crashed loudly into the wooden door. And then again. Then a man flew out of it and fell to the floor of the room. And this man, saying that those from the Golden Dawn had come to visit them, asked for help from his boss, who had long red hair. Kim Jun followed with a smirk on his face, confirming the man's words. Then he asked if this was really their boss, and the boss flew into a rage. Bringing the body of another criminal into the hall, he asked the man if he was really the boss of the Bloody Howl. Then he threw the man forward onto the floor at his boss's feet and thanked them for bringing him there. With a smile, the boss of Bloody Howl noted that Kim Jun was the one from the eastern continent whom Sigmund had brought. He heard that he had first come to Golden Dawn, and then he asked what had brought him here. Kim Jun replied that Sigmund had given him the task of clearing the alley. Upon hearing this, the man smiled crookedly. Then he grabbed his head and laughed loudly. Then he told the guy not to lie to him, because the proud Sigmund would not solve the problem with the help of a stranger. Then he threw the bottle at the wall behind the guy, and it shattered into tiny pieces. Then he raised his hand, cracking his knuckles. And he asked if the guy had been sent here. Did that mean he had come to declare war? However, Kim Jun only replied that this was not the case. The man froze and asked again. Then he asked what that meant. The guy replied that he had indeed come here at Sigmund's request. However, he was not his henchman. He spread his arms wide and exclaimed that he had come here to unite this alley. The boss of the Bloodhowl clenched his teeth and asked who this crazy bastard was. Then he called his subordinates, who immediately appeared before him. He menacingly told them to end this conversation, and he yelled for them to show what they were capable of. And the men rushed to attack the guy. The archer standing behind him fired an arrow. However, the arrow missed its target because the young man managed to catch it before it touched him. Letting go of his hand so that the arrow fell, he thought that the distance between them was about 3 meters. There were no magicians here, and there were only about 20 of them. Then he put one foot forward and shouted, "Forgotten swordsman!" Meanwhile, the criminal jumped up to strike the guy from above. Kim Jun began to draw his sword from the system window. Then he swung his sword, striking the men, and shouted, "Cut!" trying to defend himself from these blows. One of the men noted with surprise that the guy had a slash. The blow threw the opponent several meters away from Kim Jun. The criminals exclaimed that this guy was a magical swordsman. One man shouted for everyone to avoid the sharp sword. Another exclaimed, asking what they should do. Meanwhile, Kim Jun rushed forward. In a split second, he was face to face with one of the criminals, who did not expect this. And the guy struck the man right in the chest. The man flew backward, knocking the others off their feet. Kim Jun smirked and remarked that the man talked too much and said nothing of substance. Putting his sword on the floor, he asked the boss how long he was going to just stand there and stare. Then he called him by his nickname, Stub, which made the man's face darken. The guy grinned and asked if he really wanted him to kill all his subordinates. In response, Stubby just angrily shouted for everyone to disperse. Then he suddenly jumped up and rushed straight at the guy with an axe in one hand and a shield in the other. The man swung his axe, but the guy managed to block it with his sword, sending red sparks flying in all directions. The blow sent the boy's body flying backward, his feet sliding across the floor. The ogre grinned and shouted, asking if the guy wanted to see what he was capable of. Continuing to defend himself, Kim Jun thought that although the man was not as good as Sigmund, he was still stronger than him. Meanwhile, the man swung his axe sharply, causing the boy's arms to fly out to the sides. Shouting loudly, Ogrzok raised his hand to deliver the final blow and finish off the guy, his eyes glowing red with anger. The blade of the axe met the young man's arm, but something made the man stop and look at the guy with a stunned expression on his face. As it turned out, Kim Jun was able to block the man's axe with just one hand, without suffering any injuries. Kim Jun replied with a smile that it was all thanks to his level 100 equipment. In the game, this bracer is called an artifact, not a regular item, but not all players pay attention to this. According to the game settings, items of unique rank and above are called artifacts. And since such items are considered very valuable, many players want to get their hands on them. Ogryzok asked the guy if he really thought he could defeat him just because he had an artifact. The man shouted loudly again and raised his hand with the shield to strike again. However, Kim Jun responded by punching his fist into the shield. With a smirk, Kim Jun replied to the man that this artifact would be enough. Then he punched the man in the side. The blow caused Ogryzok to choke on his own blood, which gushed from his mouth, and his eyes rolled back. Then the man fell to his knees, exhausted, his arms hanging limply at his sides. Looking at this, Kim Jun smiled and wondered what the man would say when he saw the 6th set of steel gloves. He thought that thanks to this equipment, his strength had increased by 150, so the difference in their levels was nothing. But suddenly Ogryzok came to. He raised his head and shouted loudly again, spreading his arms wide. Covering himself with his arm, the guy noted that the man's recovery speed was simply incredible. A blow followed in his direction, and Kim Jun crossed his arms to block it. Looking at the even more enraged man, ready to fight even more fiercely, he thought that no matter how unique the handcuffs were, the man could still be dangerous. The ogre swung his axe, cutting through the air, but Kim Jun managed to dodge it by bending backward. Suddenly, he grabbed the man's wrist. He squeezed his wrist hard, and it glowed pink, causing the man to drop the axe. Then Kim Jun threw the man over his shoulder with a sharp movement. With a loud sound, Ogryzok hit the stone floor. However, that was not the end of it, and Kim Jun sat on top of him, and yellow lines appeared in the air, and the man screamed. A few seconds later, Kim Jun got to his feet and said that the man needed to calm down first. As it turned out, the guy had managed to knock Ogryzok out, and now he was lying unconscious on the floor. His subordinates called out to him in confusion, while Kim Jun simply sat on top of the man's huge body, holding a dagger in his hands. He told the men that if they valued their boss's life, they'd better not make a sound. They should sit quietly like mice. In response, the men froze quietly a few meters away from the guy. Closing his eyes and frowning, the guy thought it was all over. And then he wondered if he could consider himself stronger now. Opening his eyes, he thought that he couldn't think that way yet. Suddenly, he sighed and said quietly that it was strange, but he missed Raymond. He missed him after all. He was his first friend, and so he hoped that Raymond was all right. Meanwhile, Raymond was sitting in some basement. His hands were chained to the armrests of a chair. His clothes were torn, and there was blood on his chest. The man screamed in pain, begging someone to stop. In the same room lay other mercenaries whom Kim Jun had met at that time. Their bodies were covered in blood, and it was unclear whether they were dead or not. Tears streamed down Raymond's cheeks, and his voice grew quieter as he begged for it to stop. Behind him, a figure appeared, descending the stairs. The newcomer was a woman with short red hair who was smoking a thin pipe. The ugly hunchback asked her if she had arrived yet and called her Mrs. Scarlet. Scarlet asked the man if he had found out anything. As saliva dripped from the man's toothless mouth, he replied that of course he had. He had taken good care of it. And he told her that after the wave of monsters in the village of Ivra had ended, he had left. And according to the information provided by the coachman, on the way to North River, he suddenly asked to get out on the plane. Smoking her pipe, she looked sadly at the exhausted Raymond and said that the mercenaries had not given up, even after they had been captured. She asked if all mercenaries were that loyal. She told them that if they kept quiet, a sad end awaited them. Suddenly, someone entered the room and called Mrs. Scarlet. Then the man handed her a letter, saying that a carrier pigeon had arrived from Arta. The letter said that a suspicious mercenary had been found in North River. Although the mercenary's level was not high, he was quite strong and resembled the monster hunter Monty. Scarlet thought that if they found this mercenary, they might be able to find out Monty's whereabouts. Or maybe this mercenary mentioned in the letter was Monty himself. Thinking about this, the woman smiled triumphantly, and she said that they were going to North River, so everyone should get ready. Then she ordered Raymond to be killed, and he looked at her pitifully as dark streaks ran from his eyes. Then he flew into a rage and shouted that she had promised to spare his life if he told her everything he knew. However, no one was going to spare this man, and when he realized this, tears flowed from his eyes. Meanwhile, Ogryzok woke up and asked Kim Jun why he hadn't killed him, since he had every chance to get rid of him. With a smirk on his face, the guy replied that, as he had said earlier, he had come just to talk. He said that from the very beginning, he had never planned to get rid of them. Sighing, the man tilted his head to one side and asked the young man what he wanted then. Kim Jun replied that, as he had already said, Sigmund wanted him to unite the two factions, and he asked if it would take a lot of time and effort. Then he asked the man if he was interested in what would happen if he united the alley. Then he answered his own question, saying that the man would then be able to become the boss. So Kim Jun decided to pass the matter on to Ograzok, which surprised the man, and he asked again what the guy was talking about. Kim Jun said that he had made the same offer to Golden Dawn, but they didn't like it at all. And they were the type to smile to your face and then stab you in the back. Pointing his finger at the man, the guy said that, unlike them, he liked him. Then he asked how he would feel if he told Sigmund that he had united the alley, and that he, the leader of the Bloody Howl, would be the actual leader. He would become the true master of the alley, as he had always wanted. The history of the Bloodhowl gang began about 10 years ago. At that time, the alleys were organized quite differently, and criminals could not socialize and have fun there. But then someone came along who could change all that, and that hero was the current leader of the Blood War gang. He subjugated the alley not only with his cruelty, but also with his leadership qualities, thanks to which he suppressed the crowd. He was able to take control of the entire North River, and so everyone pledged their allegiance to him. But then a guy came along and said that if Ograzok did everything he said, he would soon become the ruler of the alley, and the man gladly agreed to this. Kim Jun, meanwhile, thought he couldn't believe that this man would fall for the trick of a guy he was seeing for the first time in his life. Meanwhile, one of Ograzok's subordinates stared at him. Kim Jun crossed his arms and said that the main goal was to plant bombs throughout the city. He said that the guys from Golden Dawn would run out, thinking that they had been ambushed and that the bomb would not be very powerful and therefore would not cause much damage. Ograzok asked if they would need reinforcements. Smiling even wider, Kim Jun replied that these guys wouldn't touch them and would most likely even help them, because in the eyes of the people, everything would look like this. The leader of the Bloody Howl would prevent the Golden Dawn from setting off the explosion, thereby saving many townspeople. And he would not only gain popularity, but also become the most important person in the alley. Ogrig's subordinate thought that all this was nonsense. Was Sigmund really trying to unite the alley, turning a blind eye to such dangers? Realizing that this was most likely a trap, the man told his boss to think carefully, because it all seemed very strange. He shouted, asking if he could really trust this guy. He was a nobody, and no one knew where he came from. In response, Ograzok just told the man to shut up through gritted teeth, and then exclaimed that this guy could have killed him and everyone else, but didn't, even though he had a great opportunity to do so. Then he ordered his men to be ready to set off the bombs. The subordinate gritted his teeth and agreed, but thought to himself that this was all some kind of devilry, and he couldn't trust this guy, but for the sake of his boss, he had to. After a while, night had fallen, and someone knocked on Sepia's door, and she went out to see who it was. It turned out to be Kim Jun, who smiled at the girl and took off his hood. He said they hadn't seen each other in a long time and he had come to check on her health. Looking away, the girl said that she was fine, but she felt in her heart that when the guy walked away, it was a strange feeling, and she asked him if it was dangerous. Rubbing his shoulder with his hand, he looked back and said that if he didn't go, everything would be fine for a long time. And he thought about the fact that he was moving, with that limitation in mind. But it seemed he would have to take Sepia with him, so he wouldn't have to worry. He looked sadly at the girl and said that sooner or later they would have to leave North River. He told her to be ready to pack all her things and say goodbye to everyone. Feeling sad, Sepia obediently agreed. Concerned, Kim Jun thought it was understandable that she was upset, as she would have to part with her family again, but he didn't even know how to comfort her. Then he put his hand on her head and told her not to worry, and that they would definitely find a way to break this agreement. He smiled and told her that before they left, he would let her see the beautiful sky above the North River. After a while, Kim Jun headed into the forest. He smiled, thinking that he was not the kind of person who tried to please everyone, and he asked Sigmund, who was standing opposite him, how they should start the conversation. Then he thanked the guy for waiting while he talked to his sister, and then he said he was all ears. An annoyed Sigmund told the guy to stop being sarcastic. Otherwise, if he kept being so smart, he would cut off his head. And he told the guy that he had been watching him all week. The knight said that was a remarkable job. And then he asked him, if the main task was to unite the alley, why did he suddenly need to go underground? He asked him if he really needed money. Kim Jun thought he knew that Sigmund would be following him. The knight continued, saying that he felt that attacking the leader of the Bloodhowl was an extremely dangerous decision because the people in that group were very cruel and could kill a person without hesitation. He asked him if he had thought about what would happen to his sister if he died. And Kim Jun noted with surprise that the knight was only concerned about his sister. The guy responded in a way that would reassure the other, saying that he had everything under control and that he just needed to follow his instructions. Sigmund agreed, and then he said that the leader of the Bloodhowl could not be allowed to roam freely in the alley. And while he thought he was carrying out his orders, they had to catch him. Kim Jun replied that this was true, but they had to let him deal with the Golden Dawn first. And he told Sigmund to gather the knights and march an hour after his signal. The knight asked what signal he was referring to. Kim Jun smiled and replied that he meant an explosion. Sigmund noted that this could harm civilians, to which Kim Jun assured him that there would be no casualties among the civilian population. 4 days later, the decisive day arrived. Life in North River had been quiet for the past 4 days. No one even suspected that these were their last peaceful days. Ogzok said with a smile that they had finished planting the bomb in the square last night. So now all that was left to do was wait. His subordinate replied that this was indeed the case, and that the explosion would take place today at noon. The ogre raised his hand with the bottle, saying that their moment of glory had finally arrived. He joyfully exclaimed that they were lucky that a man with the same goals had appeared, and that today, the unification of the alley which they had dreamed of for so long would take place. He thought that Golden Dawn was an enemy that could be defeated at any time if they tried hard enough. But the problem had always been Sigmund and his knights. However, this problem had been solved by a guy from the eastern continent. Looking out the window, the man replied that there was very little time left before 12 o'clock. His eyes glowed red, noting that time was moving much slower today than it had in the last 4 days. At that moment, the leader of the Bloodhowl had a premonition that he was being deceived. Being a northerner from a warlike people, he could not ignore it. He suddenly felt that danger was approaching. Ogrzok abruptly rose from his seat, surprising his men. He grabbed the lid of the box he was sitting on, and then opened it with a sharp movement, and his men asked him why he did that. As it turned out, there was a bomb in the box. Noticing this, Ogrzok asked what the hell it was, and inside was a note from Kim Jong-un telling them to see what the bomb could do. Then there was a huge, powerful explosion, and at that very moment, fireworks of different colors began to shine in the sky above the city. A woman with a child looked up at the sky in surprise and asked what it was, while her daughter waved her arms happily, saying how beautiful it was. Other townspeople also looked up at the sky and wondered if it was a fireworks festival today, or if their lord was celebrating, or if he was just trying to please them. Sepia sat in her room, leaning against the window and looking out. She admired the beauty she could see through her window. Meanwhile, Kim Jun, who was yawning and lying on a tree branch, said that the guys from Bloody Howl were too trusting. He asked why they had planted so many, and said that he had almost died running all night trying to replace those bombs with fireworks. Nevertheless, the effort was worth it. The townspeople, who still decided it was a gift from their lord, looked up at the sky, enjoying the fireworks, when suddenly someone noticed something off to the side. As it turned out, somewhere to the side, instead of fireworks, there was smoke, and the townspeople cried out that it looked like a fire had started and that they needed to call security quickly. Kim Jun lay calmly on a tree branch, noting how good it felt, while the system reported that he was gaining experience for killing the members and leader of the Bloody Howl. Looking down at the active brawl, he thought that no matter how strong Ogrzok was, he couldn't handle that many bombs, and the rest of the group was fighting Golden Dawn with all their might. A member of the blood fight pointed at the man and shouted that it was Ludens, to which he responded by shouting that they were complete bastards taking advantage of the moment. The members of the two different groups attacked each other with the intention of killing each other, and the system informed the guy that the quest to clear the alley in North River was complete. His level had increased, and his reward was the North River Knights Medal of Honor. Kim Jun watched the fight with a smirk and noted that it seemed like the boss of Golden Dawn was also at his limit, and it was only an hour after the explosion, so the Knights would take care of the rest. And just then, the Knights of the North River appeared in the alley. Kim Jun happily noted that this was exactly what he had been thinking while Sigmund was swinging his sword, killing members of both factions, filling the air with blood. The guy thought he should go after Sepia. Sepia was still standing by the window, leaning against it with her palms, and Kim Jun thought that leaving now, while her brother was busy fighting, was the best decision. But if Sepia met her brother, Sigmund might change his mind. Looking out the window, where the fireworks were still visible, she asked if this was the surprise Dio had mentioned. She gripped the window frame tightly, thinking that she really needed to leave the city. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door, and the girl, not expecting it, jumped. Turning to the door, she asked who was there, but heard no answer. Approaching the door, she noted that it was strange because she was absolutely sure she had locked it. She checked it again, and behind her stood a large man. The knights informed their commander that Zone 1 and Zone 10 had already been extinguished, and Sigmund told them that it was good work. Wiping the sweat from his face, he thought, remembering Kim Jun, that everything had gone according to plan. He noted that the boss of the Bloodhowl had died and that the Golden Dawn had been destroyed by the Bloodhowl raid. The knights would deal with the remaining members of the criminal gang. He thought that, looking at all this, one could not help but recognize the guy's abilities, and therefore it was probably better to entrust his sister to him. He ordered one of the knights to remove Luden's body, and then they would leave immediately. But suddenly someone shouted loudly, calling Mr. Sigmund, and the young man's eyes widened in surprise. As it turned out, there was some kind of purple smoke in the air, and the knights immediately asked what it was. One of them noticed that the strange smoke was coming from the corpse of the head of the Golden Dawn. Sigmund, noticing this, thought that the smoke resembled the traces left by a demon. He noticed that something quickly jumped off the roof and flew away somewhere. Noticing the direction in which something flew away, he panicked, thinking that Sepia was in that direction. Then he gave the order for everyone to retreat. Meanwhile, Kim Jun had already reached Sepia, but met someone there he did not expect. He thought that everything was definitely going according to plan, and wondered where the leader of the Golden Dawn had come from. Raising one eyebrow, he asked the guy if they could talk. The guy didn't answer, but just frowned even more, thinking that he hadn't heard Luden's life story, even when he was playing. This was a man who had expanded the Golden Dawn's position not through force, but through his outstanding business skills, yet he had been forced to disappear after Sigmund's appearance. The guy's hand trembled, and he quietly said that this couldn't be true, and wondered if he really had an undisclosed secret. Looking at the man, he noticed that he had changed a lot since their last meeting. Putting his hand on his chest, he asked with a forced smile what business he had with him. Ludens raised his hand and replied that he certainly had some business. Suddenly, he snapped his fingers, and a purple flash flew straight to the door. The guy looked at the door and noted that he had used magic to seal the room. Was he a wizard? Kim Jun thought that he wasn't sure he could defeat him because he didn't know what he was capable of. And besides, he had Sepia as a hostage. However, in the next second, the guy suddenly waved his hand, throwing something forward. As it turned out, it was a small dagger that flew straight into the man's head, piercing his forehead. But Kim Jun didn't stop there. He jumped up, swinging his sword. He headed straight for the man who was already falling on his back. With a sharp movement, the guy struck the man in the chest, causing blood to spurt upward. Luden's body fell to the floor, and Kim Jun pressed down on the sword, driving it deeper, biting his lip. Kim Jun thought he could kill the man with one blow. He reached out to Sepia, who was lying unconscious on the floor, and then he pulled her close to him, holding his sword forward. Ludens, meanwhile, got to his feet, and he noted that he liked the guy's attitude. And even though he was young, he was experienced in combat, like a true swordsman. As he spoke, the wounds on his body healed as if they had never been there, and he asked the young man if he had noticed. Kim Jun smiled and asked him if he was supposed to notice that he was a vampire. The man replied that he thought the young man already knew, and Kim Jun thought that vampires were the only ones who could regenerate. Ludens said that the guy's abilities did not live up to his expectations, and he asked what the problem was, the weapon, or was that all his power? Looking at his sword, Kim Jun thought that he really lacked strength and compensated for it with equipment. But his sword, although good, was still only level 60. He asked the man if he wanted a stake driven through his heart, to which the man replied that he wanted to talk, to which Kim Jun exclaimed that men were just a huge pain in the ass, and asked him what he wanted. The man grimaced and replied that it was all for fun, and he began to take his hand out from behind his back. The guy noticed this gesture. However, he couldn't imagine that the man would be able to get so close to him so quickly. As the fist flew toward his face, Kim Jun froze, stunned. But in the next second, he put his sword in front of him, blocking the blow. The blow sent the guy flying backward. With flashing eyes, Ludens looked at his hand, which no longer looked human. The man grabbed the sword blade and told the guy that he was holding on well. However, the guy couldn't hold out much longer. Ludens waved his hand, throwing the guy into the wall. He rushed forward, asking the boy how he managed to hold on, but suddenly something sharp appeared in front of his face. It turned out to be a candlestick, which the guy stuck in his eye, and the man staggered. The man asked the guy if he had really hit him with a silver candlestick. Ludens pulled the candlestick out of his head. Kim Jun smiled and asked if he had stuck it in too deep, and he said that he had deliberately stabbed him only in the eye. In response, the man noted that this was an effective tactic against slow opponents. Holding his sword forward, Kim Jun thought that if the candlestick didn't help, he would recover quickly. Suddenly, Ludens laughed loudly, and then he shouted that the boy had passed the test. In response, Kim Jun asked what he was talking about. Did he really know him? The man replied that of course he knew him. After all, the boy was a forgotten minion. While Sepia was still lying unconscious on the floor, the man asked the guy why he was so surprised. After all, he was this guy who knew him, and he knew him. Kim Jun thought that the man had a hidden class, and it wasn't that difficult to determine who he was, so he asked Ludens who he was. The man replied that he was a 1,000-year-old vampire who had lived a long life and become the head of the clan. This surprised the guy, and he wondered if the man's level was so high that he could be the head of a clan. That meant his level was no less than 350. Kim Jun noted that if the man had fought at full strength, he would have been dead long ago, and he asked if that meant his clan was hiding in North River. Smiling kindly, Ludens replied that he was the only one hiding in the city. Kim Jun asked him why he was alone. Hearing this question, Ludens looked down sadly and remained silent. Then he said that this land had 1,000 years of forgotten history, and the boy must have been surprised too when he saw the fresco in the temple. He asked the boy if he was mistaken or not. Suddenly, a system window popped up, announcing that a class quest had begun, which consisted of meeting a person who remembers the forgotten history, and the reward for it was the discovery of Class 1. Kim Jun was surprised when he read about the backstory called the Forgotten Minion, and wondered what it all meant. Then he exclaimed, telling the man that he wanted to know more. And Ludens began his story, saying that it began 1,000 years ago, in the Divine Era. The only thing that burdens people now is the moon, but in the past, many gods gave their teachings to people, and there were gods much more powerful than the god of the moon. One of them was the god Ludens. The man rolled up his sleeve, showing the boy a mark on his arm, and said that his god was the god of the sun. Seeing this mark, he remembered that he had already seen it when he made a contract with Sepia. Kim Jun thought that in ancient times there were numerous beliefs, but the only cult that had survived was the cult of the moon god. Judging by the pattern, this pattern of the sun god belonged to one of the lost cults. But if this religion was stronger than the cult of the moon, why didn't it survive? Kim Jun asked the man what the sun god's name was. Ludens, hiding his mark on his hand, replied that he could not say because the world was now under the control of the moon. He said that people from the cult could find him, and then he warned the guy that he also needed to be careful, because he too had the powers of the sun god. This statement surprised the young man, because he did not expect there to be a divine power that he did not know about. He asked the man if he could explain in more detail what power he was talking about, to which the man replied that the guy would hardly understand. Then he asked if he knew at least part of the story, namely about the War of the Demons in the ancient sacred era. Ludens said that the Demon King led his demonic beasts and invaded the human world, and the sun and moon began to work together to protect the people. However, the moon became jealous of the sun's power, and in the end, she erased the sun from history. Kim Jun scratched his chin and thought it was so arrogant of the Moon Clan to betray the Sun Clan. Ludens said that the moon wanted to erase all records related to the sun, and they even hunted down believers and erased their traces, which is why the sun was forgotten. Kim Jun asked him if that was true. Then how was he still alive? To which the man replied that he was the only one hiding from the eyes of the moon. However, all the surviving children of the sun were cursed, and the people of the moon even borrowed the power of the Demon King to capture the sun. They used various curses, the inability to live, to die, and also turn people into demons. Hearing this, Kim Jun thought that the Death Knight of the Forgotten Temple, Adelia Dark, was also a supporter of the sun, and that was why he inherited this power. Ludens smiled and noted that the boy had finally understood, and he noted that he was not the only one who had inherited this power. Looking at Sepia, he said that the power she used was also definitely related to the cult of the sun. Kim Jun thought with surprise that he had thought she was just using some unusual magic, but he couldn't have imagined that it would be a divine power. Scratching his head, Ludens said that she was the reason he had come to North River, and unfortunately, he had made a mistake and kidnapped her, and meeting the guy was truly the will of the sun. Kim Jun thought that before this meeting, he thought he was choosing his own paths and make decisions about how and what to do. But was all this really the will of the sun god? Meanwhile, the fireworks continued to boom and shine, and the woman sitting in the room looking at the sparkling fireworks outside the window noted how noisy the city was. Priest Kupras said that it was the first time he had seen anything like this in the city. Scarlet ordered him to see what had happened there and then report back to her. But before the man left, she asked him if he had found Dio, to which he replied that the last time he checked, he was with the vice captain of the North River. The woman asked about the relationship between the two men, to which the man replied that he did not know because the knights were good at hiding it. Scarlet thought about what they had said, that here in North River, the influence of the knights was much stronger than that of the Church of the Moon. She smiled and noted that she had heard that the vice captain was outstanding here, to which Kupras replied that Sigmund was known as a knight of great honor and faith. The woman remarked that it sounded funny, causing the man to look at her in confusion. The woman thought that destroying faith was a lot of fun, and therefore many interesting things awaited her. Getting up from her chair, she told Kupras to get ready, and that she wanted to see the face of this great vice captain. Meanwhile, Kim Jun wondered whether the god of this game had anything to do with him being stuck here. Suddenly, Ludens grinned and noted that the guy had come to the right place, and then declared that the conversation was over. He said that Sigmund was already there, and just then screams were heard from behind the door. The man said that the guy still had a lot of questions, but he would definitely find the answers. And then he told him to visit Estelrum, where he had met his close friend. Disappearing into the bright light of the portal, he said that they had not spent much time together, but he enjoyed talking to the young man and asked him not to doubt his words. Suddenly, looking at him sharply, he said that the sun would surely rise again. And then the man disappeared from the room as if he had never been there. At that very moment, loud noises were heard outside the door, and then, shouting about where the thief was, Sigmund and his knights burst into the room. Looking around, he noticed that only Sepia and Kim Jun were in the room, and he asked why only the two of them were there. He asked what had happened here. Kim Jun did not answer the question, and a window about the class quest lit up above his head. After a while, someone sitting in the cell told the guard to feed him, to which the guard ordered him to shut up. Lying in the hay, Kim Jun replied that it wasn't his fault that something had gone wrong. He thought about how difficult it would be to get rid of the false accusation, since he was connected to the demon, and he noted that this bastard had caused so much damage, and now he had to clean up the mess. Suddenly, Sigmund appeared at the guy's cell. The guard saluted, and the guy yelled at the other guy to let him go. In response, the guard yelled at him about how he dared to talk to his commander like that, and Sigmund asked him to leave them alone, because he needed to question the suspect. Standing at the bars, Kim Jun frowned and asked the guy if he was being too harsh on him. Avoiding eye contact awkwardly, the guy replied that there were too many prying eyes here and apologized for keeping him late. Then he said that something worse had happened. Namely, the moon's envoy had arrived, and Kim Jun froze at the news. Sigmund continued, saying that, according to him, he was looking for a mercenary named Monty, and he was also curious about the huge explosion that had occurred in North River, as well as the guy's connection to the demon. In response, Kim Jun looked away tensely, thinking that the church was looking for him for some reason. Sigmund said that the Church of the Moon had demanded that the guy and Sepia be questioned since they were together at the scene, but he refused that request. In response, Kim Jun asked him if it was dangerous, and he thought that there was no place on this continent that was not under the rule of the moon. And even if all the knights of the North River opposed the moon, it would not end well. Sigmund said that if the interrogation began, Sepia's abilities could be revealed, and then she would be in danger. The boy grabbed the handle of the cell door and noted that he still didn't trust Kim Jun. And then with a sharp movement, he tore off the handle, saying that he had no other choice. After leaving the cell, the boy asked the knight what he was going to do, to which he replied that they had little time, so he would delay them. Suddenly, other knights ran out from the depths of the corridor, shouting that the inhabitants of Song Wangshan Moon had arrived. Sigmund turned calmly to them and said that he would come to them soon. Turning his head towards Kim Jun, he said that Sepia was now in his room. Then he bared his teeth, looking at the main character. Turning his back on him, he told the boy to take her with him and leave the North River immediately. In response to this, Kim Jun, without thinking twice, ran in the opposite direction from the guy. He thought Sigmund would do anything to stop them, especially for his sister's sake. But could he stand against the people of the moon? Even before the boy heard Luden's words, he thought that the Church of the Moon was the player's ally. But now they are turning into his enemies. GG ran silently from the weight of this information, and then he grinned and thought that it was scary to even think about it. Meanwhile, a member of the Church of the Moon approached and exclaimed that in the name of the moon, they would search the entire northern river. The Knights of the North River responded by exclaiming that this city was under the jurisdiction of their knights, and they would not forgive such disrespect. Stepping forward with a smirk on her face, Scarlet asked again. She said that they dared to stand in the way of the Saints' representative, and now they dare to talk about some kind of respect? The knight continued, saying that they could not allow anything to be searched without the permission of his vice captain. But his speech was interrupted by a swift lunge. It turned out to be Scarlet, who swung her sword, cutting the skin on the knight's throat. Blood gushed from the knight's throat, and the rest drew their swords and cried out, asking how she dared. The woman lowered the sword, dripping with blood, and said that she could afford to punish him. And then she said that if they gave her information about the vice captain's younger sister and the mercenary from the eastern continent, the problem would be solved. And then, waving her sword, she declared that if they refused, she would perform the execution ceremony. The knights were simply furious, and this hatred fueled Scarlet's joy. But suddenly Sigmund appeared, shouting for everyone to stop and not allow anyone to move without his signal. The knights immediately turned to the voice of their vice captain. As he passed the wounded man, he told the knights to hurry and escort him, which they did. Placing a hand on her flushed cheek, Scarlet turned to Sigmund and said that he was rumored to be the knight, and she asked him if he really led the knights. The guy replied that since the captain was absent, he was only acting as his deputy. And then he asked how the Inquisitor, who was supposed to conduct a proper trial, had allowed himself to harm the Knight of the North River. The woman replied that he was in her way. Hearing this, the knights cried out indignantly, wondering how she could convince a man that he worshipped God. In response to this, Sigmund raised his hand and ordered the soldiers to stop. He then told the woman that although he had given the knights permission to intervene after the investigation was completed, further action was unacceptable. Scarlet replied that it was obvious that they were trying to hide something from them. Specifically, they are trying to hide his sister, Sepia. Sigmund replied that his sister was a victim unrelated to the incident. And since she was unwell, the knights would first calm her down and then interrogate her. Putting away the sword, the woman asked again with a smile. And then she wondered if they were really trying to convince them this way. And then the sword flashed its tip on the asphalt, and she suddenly rushed at the guy with a sword. The boy turned his head and managed to dodge, but the blade of the sword still grazed his cheek. The woman, her eyes sparkling, said she hated waiting. So what should they do? Sigmund froze as the sword was in front of his face and the knights wanted to attack Scarlet. The woman noted that the guy was able to dodge her sudden attack and asked if what the rumors were saying was true, and she thought that this guy could give her a worthy rebuff. However, he didn't even touch his sword. Placing her hand on his cheek, Scarlet said it was so absurd that he had received the title of knight when he himself came from the slums. To which Sigmund replied with a smirk that she was right. This was far worse than the straightforwardness of Scarlet, the Red Rose goddess. She waved her hand and noticed that the guy was also a gentleman. And then she rushed towards him again. The guy met her blow with the armor on his arm. Scarlet jerked her hand back and asked the guy why he didn't show off his skills. And suddenly her sword became flexible and began to wrap around the guy's hand. Pulling the rope, she threw the guy right on top of herself and asked him if he was just ignoring her. And her knee hit the guy right in the face. From this blow, Sigmund, holding his face with his free hand, fell to the ground. She put her foot on his shoulder and pulled on the whip, telling him to stop squirming if he wasn't going to resist. Looking at the woman, Sigmund said that he was just being careful, and he thought he couldn't believe they had decided to carry out such a radical investigation because of what had happened yesterday. Demonic traces appeared in the city yesterday at noon, but Scarlet had already been here before. And the guy said that the woman said that the Order's goal was to interrogate two people, namely his sister and the mercenary. And then he asked if Monty the mercenary wasn't the main target. Scarlet replied that she thought this Monty guy was involved, and the investigation of demon outbreaks is pushed to the background, and it feels like they're trying to protect this mercenary. Sigmund replied that it was just a misunderstanding. He said he didn't know any Monty, and the suspect he arrested wasn't a mercenary either. Scarlet asked him again and thought that it didn't sound like a lie. But then why is he willing to risk his life to stand by his words, out of knightly pride, out of devotion to his family? The woman thought that, in any case, this was worth paying special attention to. Suddenly, the Knights of the Order of the Moon called Scarlet. Looking around, she asked what was the matter, and suddenly they told her that, according to them, the suspect had disappeared. Meanwhile, Kim Jun was still in the dungeon, and he irritably replied that it was that damn Sigmund who had done nothing for him. He thought this prison was a complex system, practically impossible for newcomers to escape. But he'd been here before, in the game. And to get out of here, you need to move the bed in the third prison cell on the left. And behind it, there will be an exit. After a while, Kim Jun's head hit the ground and made a passage through it to the outside. And as it turns out, this exit leads to the backyard of the mansion. Hiding behind a tree, the boy heard the cries of the Order of the Moon Knights. He noted that the paladins were already fighting. He remembered that Sigmund said that his sister was in his room, somewhere on the 4th floor. He thought about taking on this case, but Sigmund is the only one who knows he's escaped, and neither the Templars nor the Paladins of the Order must meet. But he couldn't commit such an inhumane act and leave Sepia here, and the boy wondered if the difficulty of this game wasn't too high. Kim Jun decided to rummage through his inventory, hoping to find something useful there. In his inventory, he found many different spells, and among them all was the Potion of Transformation, which transformed the selected target for 10 minutes. After some time, The maid who was carrying the laundry noticed a guy passing by. She called out to him, calling him Ted, and said they hadn't seen each other in a while. Then she asked him if Zeke had sent him here or not. The boy replied that he had come here on Sigmund's orders. It turns out that Ted was Kim Jun, who bumped into him in the backyard and knocked him down, and he felt sorry for him. The maid showed him the way to the room where Sepia was, and Kim Jun thought with relief that it was good that he chose the transformation potion and not the invisibility potion. He knocked on the door of the room. Sepia asked from behind the door who it was. The boy replied that it was Ted, her servant, and he has a message from Sigmund. The girl cautiously peeked out from behind the door, and suddenly the guy grabbed her hand and said that they didn't have time. The girl was shocked and didn't understand what was happening. When Kim Jun entered the room, the spell from the potion disappeared from him, and Sepia asked him how he got there. Suddenly, shouts were heard from behind the door that members of the Order of the Moon were going to take Sepia by force, which frightened the girl. She asked the guy what was going on, to which, coming closer, Kim Jun replied that he would explain to her later, and then he extended his hand to her and asked her if she would trust him. The girl put her hand in his almost without thinking. In response to this, Kim Jun smiled happily, and then, with a sharp movement of his hand, he doused the girl with some kind of yellow liquid. It turned out to be a petrification potion that turned the target into a stone statue for 10 minutes. Then the guy called up his inventory, and something hit him with a bright flash. And now there was a stone series in the inventory. Noticing this, the guy chuckled and thought about how the game doesn't allow you to put creatures into your inventory. However, petrified creatures are classified as statues and can be easily added to your inventory. One day, he petrified a monster and brought it to town to free it. The guy discovered this secret while experimenting with the character's characteristics. With a quick leap, Kim Jun jumped out of the window and rushed down, and then he landed on the ground. At that very moment, screams were heard that the suspect had disappeared. He turned around and quietly told Sigmund to take care of himself while he thought about the paladins already tearing and throwing, and he quietly told himself that it was time to leave. And he immediately remembered Luden's words about the need to visit Estelrum, where the man's close friend lived, a city of the undead. The scene shifted to the past. Sepia and Sigmund were orphaned and grew up in the slums, where they had to fight for survival. People were constantly checking them out. They were people of all walks of life, scoundrels, knights, and aristocrats looking for a good time. The back streets of the North River were so unsafe that they became famous throughout the continent. And so Sepia adopted an unspoken law. People do nothing for nothing. There was an incident where she was almost tricked into human trafficking by an old, nice man pretending to be a gentleman. An equally respectable-looking nobleman almost deceived her in order to use her to distribute drugs. And so Sepia learned to be suspicious of people. She trusted only her brother. However, one day, she met one man, with whom I didn't feel this way, but beliefs that no one else would believe continue to haunt her. There's only one thing that rings in her head. Goodness is never done for free. Suddenly opening my eyes, she saw Kim Jun in front of her and wondered if she could be wrong. The guy asked the girl how she was feeling and said that she needed to be careful as the petrification had just been removed. As Sepia stood up, she thought that because she was weak and quarreling with her brother, she was only causing trouble for Dio. She can't always accept his help anymore. She can't remain weak. Kim Jun asked her what was wrong with her. Are these side effects of petrification? But in response, the girl only exclaimed that she wanted to become stronger. She asked the boy if she could become stronger if she followed him. She wants to never need help again, but to be able to stand up for herself. In response to this, the guy opened his eyes wide and in surprise. And then he smiled kindly and proudly. And then he replied that of course he could, but she would face all sorts of difficulties. And he asked her if she could handle it. The girl assured him that she would definitely cope and would not even cry or give up. In response to this, Kim Jun only smiled and thought that if she became stronger, then he would also feel better. And although Sigmund asked him to protect his sister, when she showed such determination, the guy could not do anything about it. And then the guy decided to explain to the girl the situation her brother found himself in. And the girl asked again that her brother had been accused of being a heretic. And that's why the Church of the Moon had begun to pursue him. The boy met Ludens and thus learned of the power she possessed, but he could not leave her. The girl thanked the guy for this, to which he replied that there was nothing to thank him for. Sepia noted sadly that she, in the end, hadn't even been able to say goodbye to her brother. In response, Kim Jun assured her there was nothing to worry about, as they would definitely meet again. But he himself thought he couldn't guarantee that. Kim Jun then began rummaging through his bag, looking for a weapon for the girl. And after a while, he pulled out a crystal bow that had a unique rank and no level limit. Taking it in her hands, the girl asked the guy if it was really her weapon, to which he replied that this unique item was now, which can be used even at low strength, or, to be more precise, the artifact now belongs to her. Kim Jun, looking at the girl, thought that he, in fact, had already planned to level up Sepia's training from the moment he arrived at the Northern River. And for developing strength and dexterity, there was no better weapon than the bow. While Sepia was trying to draw the bowstring, the boy thought that the girl, according to Ludens, was closer to the wizard class. And in order for her to use magic well, she needs to improve her accuracy. Kim Jun brightened and thought that the girl, as a newcomer, had unlimited potential, so maybe they should start with the basics. After some time, two huge green monsters that resembled people were walking through the forest. One of them was carrying a large bag on his shoulder. Suddenly, an arrow flew at them from somewhere to the side. The arrow hit the second, smaller monster right in the chest, and blood sprayed out of its wound in all directions. Soon the monster fell dead to the ground, and the first one grabbed his axe in panic, looking around frantically. However, the girl standing on the tree branch, she fired a second arrow to the side, which quickly headed forward. And this arrow hit the second monster right in the head, piercing his skull, causing blood to spurt out as well. The sight caused the first monster to stagger back in panic, holding his axe as his fellow monster died before his eyes. And the girl jumped from the tree branch and ran straight towards the back of the unsuspecting monster. With a quick and deft movement, she landed right on his neck, causing him to cry out. In response to this landing, the monster turned sharply and swung his huge axe, but the girl managed to notice this blow and jump and therefore was able to dodge. Suddenly, she jerked her hand back with the arrow in it, and the arrow in her hand caught fire, and the fire illuminated the girl's menacing face. And then she plunged that fiery arrow straight into the monster's eye, causing it to let out a truly terrifying scream. After such a blow, the monster lowered his head while blood flowed from his eye, and the girl deftly jumped over his head, leaning on his neck. Then she pressed her bow to the monster's neck, causing it to throw its head back. The girls placed their feet on the monster's back and began to press their hands to themselves, trying to strangle the monster, causing its body to shake. These actions caused the monster to open its mouth wide, revealing its two lower fangs, and saliva flowed from its mouth like a river. After a while, the monster's hand fell limply, and then with a loud sound, the body of the huge monster fell to the ground. Sepia looked down on it, trying to catch her breath, and then she smiled easily, and said that she could handle this task. Kim Jun just came up, and he scratched his head awkwardly and said that she had done a really good job, but he wondered how she had managed it in the first place. Sepia's learning speed was simply incredible. Did she really know how to defend herself from the very beginning? The guy thought he was a fool for thinking that she was a person who couldn't stand even the sight of blood. However, it was still surprising that she was able to master the skill so quickly and become stronger, and so the guy wanted to teach her a lot. Kim Jun thought with resignation that in just 15 days, the girl had become much stronger than she had been before. Sepia closed her eyes and sighed, and then she happily told the guy that she would go and check if there were any more monsters left, and the guy didn't stop her. He thought that he would never have thought that she could improve these skills so quickly, using only physical abilities. But what surprised him the most was that Sepia had not yet demonstrated her sun power, and if she could skillfully use this power, she could become as powerful as a monster. Sepia still doesn't know how to control her strength because she was once attacked by a huge wolf. The girl froze in panic at this sight. The boy rushed to her aid, reaching out his hand to the monster to stop her. However, suddenly this monster was engulfed in flames. It turned out to be Sepia, who can use her left power, but only when they are in danger. Meanwhile, Kim Jun called up Sepia's stats window. Looking at it, he replied that when they met, she was level 15. So it turns out that it has doubled in size, but her class still remains unknown. Kim Jun scratched his chin and wondered how he could unlock the girl's class, and whether he needed to complete a quest to do so. As he walked forward, the boy tripped over an axe that the monster had dropped. Having sunk lower, the guy looked at the huge bag and wondered if this was what those monsters were carrying. Looking at the tools, the boy noted that the monsters that lived alone did not engage in agriculture, which meant that these were monsters that lived in groups. From this, the guy concluded that somewhere near them, there was a cave of these very monsters. Sepia, who had already returned, looked at the guy and asked him if everything was okay. He muttered something quietly in response, and the girl asked again, to which he said that he wanted to first see the cave of these monsters before going to Estelrum. Picking up the monster's tool from the ground, he said with a smile that he needed to meet the witch. In the game world, witches were considered monsters and NPCs. There are witches who are considered heretics. There are those who commit evil deeds. But there are also witches who give quests or help players. The Shadow Witch. Kim June is about to meet is very close. She lives in a monster cave, is around level 150, and drops various items. However, the Shadow Witch is the apprentice of the Witch of Balance, the most powerful witch in the world. And therefore, compared to the guy, she has much more knowledge. Kim June wondered if they could learn anything from her about Sepia's condition and her unknown power. As they walked along the path, Sepia asked the boy if she understood correctly, that he wanted to find a witch to ask her about the power of the sun, to which the guy agreed. The girl then asked him if they could really trust this witch. After thinking for a moment, Kim June replied that he was not entirely sure, but the witch did know a lot. And besides, witches can't stand fire, and so if they quarrel, they can quickly sort it out. And he told her not to worry, because he had means that, if anything, could calm the girl down. After some time, Kim June and Sepia reached the Hafner Valley. Meanwhile, somewhere in the cave there was someone. Everything inside this cave was filled with various bottles with multicolored liquids and various scrolls in an incomprehensible language. On a small red sofa, surrounded by huge stacks of books, with a pointed hat pulled down over her eyes, lay a girl. Suddenly, a black raven flew into the cave, spreading its feathers in all directions. He landed on the girl's hat and tapped it with his beak several times. The girl waved her black-gloved hand, scaring away the crow, and she said that she was already waking up. Lifting her hat higher from her eyes, she asked the raven that had settled on her shoulder what had happened. The raven's eyes flashed red and he began to chirp rapidly. Understanding what the raven had told her, the girl asked again if uninvited guests had really arrived. Suddenly, she snapped her fingers and exclaimed happily that it coincided so perfectly with the harvest season, and she asked where her potatoes were. A few minutes later, those same huge green monsters came into her room and said that the lady had called them. The girl told them that they had Ostuk here, and so they had to take everything they had, and the monsters meekly accepted the order. Relaxing on the sofa, the girl said that she hoped her guests had a lot of money, but then her stomach screamed loudly and she put her hand on it, noting that she hadn't eaten for several days. But then she suddenly threw her arms out to the sides and exclaimed that if she had a lot of money, she would buy herself a chicken and eat eggs every day. Meanwhile, in the sky above the cave, several black ravens were already flying. Kim June and Sepia hid behind the rocks at the entrance to the cave, and the girl asked if it was really here, because she didn't see monsters but witches. Looking at the flock of crows, the boy said that they should wait, and the witch must have already noticed their arrival. Then several huge monsters came out of the cave, and the guy noted that if they wanted to meet the witch, they had to deal with the monsters first. Sepia pulled back her bowstring and stood up with a smile, saying that she could easily deal with such monsters. But before the girl could rush into battle, Kim June grabbed her clothes and told her not to rush so much. The girl asked him if they weren't going to fight these monsters, to which the guy told her that they needed to look at the map first. Not understanding what Kim June was talking about, Sepia asked again. The guy nodded in response, thinking that in this game, there was no difference between high-level and low-level players in their ability to read cards. And if you know how to read cards, your winning percentage increases significantly. Looking at the map, the guy noted that the appropriate level for this valley is 90. And now that he's with Sepia, he has to use different tactics than when he was fighting alone. Pointing to one of the towers, he told the girl to take care of the troops on the tower. He told her that the number of monsters she could face now was no more than that. And so if she felt like she was being surrounded, she should run. A little disappointed, Sepia replied that she didn't want to run away, but she would be very careful. Kim June chuckled and thought he had been overconfident. But then he felt relieved, because pride brings death even to the strongest. He told the girl to take charge of her safety, and he would take special care of everything else. Having put the arrow in his hand, the girl pulled the string of her bow hard, and then she said that she was ready. After some time, the head of the monster that was on the tower appeared from behind the walls of the tower. Noticing this, Kim June shouted at the girl that she should attack, and Sepia, pulling her hand back, aimed straight at that very monster, and she released the arrow. And this arrow hit the monster right in the forehead while he was on the tower. Then Kim June and Sepia ran forward, emerging from their hiding place. The girl jumped, raising her hands with the bow above her head. She then swung her arms sharply, hitting the monster on the head. However, another monster with a club in his hands was about to attack her from behind. But this monster had already been eliminated by Kim June, who quickly swung his sword. And then he looked at the girl with a smile, whose face was serious. and then 2 arrows pierced the other monster, hitting him right in the chest, and he flew back. The monster's body fell to the ground with a dull thud, and Sepia placed her foot on it. And, as it turned out, all the monsters had already been defeated and were lying on the ground. Sepia brushed strands of hair from her forehead and took a deep breath, sweat trickling down her face. Kim Jun, saying that the girl was a good girl, handed her a bottle of water. The girl gratefully accepted the bottle from the guy, who looked at her with a smile. Looking at her, Kim Jun thought that she had no injuries, and therefore she had really improved her skills. The boy brought up the statistics window again, and his and Sepia's windows appeared in midair. He sighed and noted that the girl had already reached level 49, and if she was level 50 and he knew her class, he could give her a more effective weapon. Although the crystal bow is a powerful weapon, it still cannot kill a monster in one blow. Suddenly the girl asked Kim Jun what they will do with the witch, and the guy immediately came to his senses. The girl asked thoughtfully if they should talk to her after everything they had done here. Kim Jun replied that the witch would be very angry. Sepia then pointed out that they wouldn't be able to talk to her then. But in response, the guy said, smiling, that he had one good trick. As Sepia walked through the cave, she felt like there would be no fight, so there was no need to worry. But, as she doused herself with water, she said that they had better not relax, just in case. Agreeing with the girl, the guy thought that she had been raised to be a tough nut. The system reported that they had arrived at the monster cave in Hafner Valley. Sepia noted that it was so quiet in here, and she asked if it was because all the monsters were outside. Kim Jun replied that there should still be a monster shaman left in the cave, but he was not going to kill him. He thought that the witch had put a lot of power into this shaman, and therefore if they killed him too, then the conversation with her would be very serious. Moving on, the girl asked what they should do next, to which the guy replied that they should go around the shaman and head straight to the laboratory. Kim Jun looked around, looking for something, and then in one of the walls he found a short passage to the witch's laboratory. Following this passage, he thought about the controversy that arose when this wire was first discovered in the game. People debated whether this was a bug or a design flaw, but eventually came to the conclusion that it was carefully designed. Suddenly, Sepia asked the guy if he had really been here before, since he knew everything so well, which made him shudder. But he replied that he had already been there, and then climbed into that passage. On the other side of this passage, there was a metal grate, and in front of it lay books. Kim Jun rolled down, broke through the bars, and entered the laboratory. After some time, Sepia also reached the laboratory, where they saw a girl sitting on a chair. Kim Jun turned to her, asking if she could hear him. In response to this, the witch suddenly laughed, and then she suddenly turned with a loud laugh to her guests. The guy replied that they had come to the right place, and the girl asked if the witch was definitely there. But suddenly a tear ran down the witch's cheek, and she said that she needed her potatoes to last for another 6 months. Kim Jun replied that it was surprising that she still struggled for food. The witch rose from her chair and came closer, asking them if they knew how much one such monster cost, and then she said that they would pay her for everything. She cried out that they would pay her with their death, and her body was engulfed in a bright light. Sepia responded by raising her hand and pulling back the bowstring, but then Kim Jun jumped out in front of her, shielding her with his hand, and then with a smile on his face he handed over some kind of bag. Faced with this, the witch shuddered, and the light that surrounded her disappeared. The guy said with a smile that he was a doctor, who came here from the Eastern Sea, and his name is Dio. He put the bag on the table, and coins fell out of it, and the guy said that he heard a rumor that in this valley there lived a witch who needed new knowledge, and so he came here to ask for help. Sepia thought resignedly, was this really a bribe? The indignant witch pointed her finger at him and asked again if the one who killed her monsters was really asking for help. Kim Jun, still smiling, grabbed his head and replied that he was sorry that everything happened this way. He threw up his hands and exclaimed that at least they had something she would definitely like. The witch noted that this bag was filled to the brim with gold. The guy then said it was rude of him because it wasn't enough, and threw another bag of gold on the table. The stunned witch was surprised at how much money was there. She immediately thought about how many chickens she could buy, but suddenly came to her senses and thought that she didn't need a chicken. She remembered that the path of a witch is always difficult, and even if she is hungry, she should not lose her dignity. And then she told the guy that if he was trying to bribe her, it wouldn't work. Kim Jun replied that she had misunderstood because it was money for killing monsters, and then he handed her the real gift, which turned out to be some kind of ball. The witch exclaimed in surprise, noting that it was the essence of flame. Kim Jun thought that this flame essence was very difficult to obtain, and therefore it was coveted by both players and NPCs. But of course, the guy's inventory is simply overflowing with these balls. He told the witch that in the East, this ball is used as a decoration. But he'd heard that here, it's a valuable material, the shocked girl asked again. The guy said he could give her as many of these things as she wanted, and then asked her what she thought now. The witch was still stunned by this gesture, and therefore did not immediately find an answer. After a few seconds, she suddenly raised her head and said shyly that they should sit down first. Sitting down, she said that her name was Evelyn Lapis, and she was an apprentice witch of balance. Then Kim Jun, who called himself D.O., and Sepia also introduced themselves. After examining the girl, Evelyn said that she must be the child she had heard about, to which the girl asked if she knew her. In response, the witch asked her if she was born with the power of the sun. A shocked Kim Jun wondered how she knew this. Is it from Ludens, or maybe she herself is a member of the Sun sect? The guy asked her how she knew about this, to which she replied that she learned about it from her teacher, and she said that her teacher was one of the 7 stars of Walpurgis Night, and the same could be said about Ludens. The guy asked what this Walpurgis Night was. Evelyn scratched her chin and noted that perhaps she should explain, and then she turned her gaze to something. Following her gaze, the guy realized that she was looking at the essence of the flame, and then he threw the ball to her, in response to which the witch asked if there really wouldn't be any problems later. And then she cleared her throat, beginning her story. While Walpurgis Night is a secret meeting of 7 stars, united by one goal, the 7 most influential believers are called the 7 stars. Evelyn said that her teacher, along with Ludens, belonged to this place. Kim Jun thought that all 5 boss monsters were called Pentagram, and the Witch of Balance was one of them. So it turns out that these 5 bosses and 7 stars are separate entities. Even though the power of the sun was forgotten, her traces are still hidden across the continent, and so the mission of the 7 stars is to find her. The witch said that, in other words, this Walpurgis Night is a gathering created before the exchange of information. Then Kim Jun asked what they were going to do with the traces. The girl replied that she knew nothing about it. However, according to her teacher, the revival of the sun will restore order to the world. Hearing this, the boy thought that the upside-down turn of the world, when it is ruled by the Church of the Moon, is a real cataclysm, turning the game's worldview upside down. The system of this game leads him along the path of the sun, and 7 stars come to his aid. Until recently, the outcome of the struggle with the Church of the Moon was unclear. But what if the Witch of Balance, a member of the Pentagram, is on the same side? What if all 7 stars are entities of the Pentagram? Then maybe he can deal with the Church of the Moon. Kim Jun asked the witch if there were any other witches who believed in the sun, to which she replied that she didn't know for sure, because this situation was not discussed even among witches. However, her teacher's witches dedicated themselves to researching the power of the sun. Kim Jun then thought that this explained why there were so many fire-related entries in the journal. He asked what exactly she was researching, to which the witch replied that she was researching everything she could. But overall, it was research work to restore the power of the sun. The guy then said that she seemed very unhappy about helping her teacher with his research. In response, Evelyn exclaimed that, of course, she was unhappy, because she was only 26 years old, and she couldn't even imagine what she could do. Clutching her head, she screamed that the only reason she cared about this monster farm was because of this research. Kim Jun noted how noisy this witch was. Her behavior reminded him of a graduate student who also complained when he got drunk and who also lacked funds for his research. Suddenly, Sepia asked the witch if her teacher didn't rely on her. In response to this, Evelyn asked again, and then rushed to hug the girl, saying that she was very good at understanding people and that she was the hardest working witch. Touching his head, the guy said that he had come here for a reason. And then he said that the witch could unlock Sepia's power. After thinking for a moment, Evelyn replied that she didn't even know and began to carefully examine the girl. They held hands, and some kind of flow of energy appeared around the witch. She asked the girl if this power often manifested itself when emotions accumulated, to which she replied that it sometimes did, and manifested itself when she was in danger. Sepia noted that she always loses consciousness. Evelyn said that perhaps this force was much more powerful than she thought. But at the moment, she can't help control this power in any way. Kim Jun said that he thought so, and thought that it seemed like there was nothing more he could do. But then Evelyn exclaimed that it can help control uncontrollable rage. The surprised guy asked how this could happen. The witch replied that she was using her shadow to awaken another consciousness. The shadow she's dealing with isn't just a shadow that follows her around. It's more of a different consciousness, which thinks and moves independently. In other words, it is another personality. Evelyn exclaimed that Sepia would no longer lose consciousness every time the power manifested as the shadow would allow her to gain another self-awareness. The boy stepped forward and said that it sounded dangerous and that it would not be the sepia he knew. To which the witch replied that everything was not so, because inside a person there were many personalities, and it was only necessary to bring out one of them. The guy thought that everything had become much more complicated, and perhaps this was not the best solution. But that's all that's available now, and it would be much better if Sepia used her power consciously. Evelyn said that even if the girl could use her powers consciously, she would still need training since she didn't know how to use magic. She said it would be nice to learn the art of magic from their witches. But that was impossible unless she had a talent for manipulating magic. Magic exists in every creature, but if there is no talent, then nothing will come of it, even if you suffer until death. Sepia looked away uncertainly and thought, and then she cried out, asking if she could teach her. Kim Jun noted that everything changed that day, and the girl developed a strong desire to study. Evelyn agreed to try. The girl sat with her back to Evelyn, and she began to shine light from her hands onto her back. The witch asked her if she felt anything. Turning around, Sepia replied that she felt nothing. Scratching the back of her head, the witch replied that nothing would work then, but there was no need to be too upset, because this happens to everyone for the first time. The girl asked if this meant that if she could sense mana, she could use magic, to which Evelyn replied that sensing mana was the beginning of magic. Kim Jun stood to the side watching, and the witch continued, saying that even if she could sense mana, it didn't mean she would be able to use magic right away. The guy asked if things would get better with the help of a woman. Evelyn replied that there was such a method of guidance, but it would take several months, to which the guy said that they could not spend months here. As he walked towards the exit, Kim Jun looked at Sepia and said that it was time for them to leave, but suddenly something lit up the guy's face. It turned out to be Sepia, who pressed her palms to herself, from which light burst forth. And then a fireball burst into flames in her palms, and the fire spread throughout the room. Evelyn looked up in surprise. Kim Jun was also surprised, and he exclaimed, asking what was going on. Evelyn didn't answer his question, but only asked how she did it. She came to her senses, and clutching her head, she noticed that her entire laboratory was on fire. Sepia asked how to stop it now, and the witch continued to mournfully lament her materials. Then she took out her staff and summoned a water cage, causing her staff to glow blue. And then streams of water appeared around the girl. And this water completely flooded the girl's body, extinguishing the fire. The fire that was around the girl went out, but there was still fire on the sofa and books. She then asked the girl how she could use magic without feeling it. Kim Jun asked that it was not magic. In response, the witch exclaimed that it was definitely magic. She asked the girl if she felt mana from the flames, to which she replied that she only felt warmth. Hearing this, the woman rushed toward the girl, grabbing her by the shoulders. She asked if this was the level of magic that would have burned everything if they hadn't stopped it in time. And then she exclaimed, "Is this really the same ego power she had only heard about?" Kim Jun said he didn't know what it was, and then asked if that meant it couldn't be learned. The witch replied that it was very easy to learn. And then she turned back to Sepia and exclaimed, telling her that this meant that even if she couldn't sense mana and only knew theory, she would be able to use absolutely any magic. Hearing this, Kim Jun thought that, judging by what he just heard, Sepia's abilities were quite suitable for the game. Even if players don't sense or react to magic, they can easily use it once they learn how. And so, in order to use strong magic, the player needs to level up. The guy asked how long it would take to learn all the magic. Evelyn responded by saying that everything is individual, so she can't say for sure. It personally took her about half a year to learn just the basic theory from her teacher. Kim Jun asked again, a little disappointed and stunned. The irritated girl remarked that it was very fast. Kim Jun said he couldn't spend that much time on it because he still had a lot of work to do, but he also couldn't leave Sepia. Evelyn asked what the problem was. Shouldn't the girl just follow him? The guy, a little taken aback by this question, asked again. The witch asked about the research they were doing here on Sepia's power. Not understanding, Kim Jun asked what she meant. Putting one arm around the girl's shoulder, Evelyn replied that there was a person right here who possessed the power of the sun, and so of course she should go with them. Kim Jun thought it was all a bit unconvincing. And then he thought about how Evelyn was, after all, an apprentice of the balance witch, so her presence certainly wouldn't hurt. And then he looked at the witch, causing her to flinch. Pressing herself even closer to the girl, she quickly began to say that if she followed them, she would definitely not be a hindrance. She will only keep an eye on Sepia and take some notes. Closing his eyes, the boy asked what Sepia herself thought about all this. The girl looked at the witch a little awkwardly, not knowing what to say, And then she bowed low and said, turning to Evelyn, that she, as her teacher, must take care of her. Evelyn, hearing this, blushed slightly and asked again. The girl exclaimed that she would still teach her a lot. Then the witch joyfully exclaimed that everything was correct, and she would teach the girl many things. But Kim Jun, not feeling so enthusiastic, looked at them and thought that the witch really wanted to be called a teacher. Meanwhile, several people gathered around a round table, in the middle of which a fire was burning. One of them asked Ludens if he had gone crazy, and then he asked why this issue had not been raised at their last meeting. Suddenly, someone to the right of the speaker asked with a smile whether Ludens had always been like this. In response, the first one slammed his fist on the table and exclaimed that this wasn't a question that could simply be ignored, adding that it had always been that way. Taking a breath to calm himself, he asked where the guy he said had the power was. Ludens replied that he had told him to go to Estelrum, and then he grinned evilly. Then the first speaker banged his fist on the table again and asked him if he had really gone mad. Only 1,000 years had passed, and he was already about to kill him. Then a man next to him, calling him Crassus, urged him to calm down. Crassus asked indignantly. Then he pointed to the empty chair and asked where Palkita was, and he noted that the full moon was approaching. Crassus rose from his chair and suddenly cried out, and his whole body was illuminated by the bright light of lightning, and then a bow appeared in his hand. Pointing him forward, he said that if the man was telling the truth, then this guy must be the key to gaining the power of the sun. And the man talked about how he brought them to the cemetery of death. The man to Crassus's right, with the same smile on his face, told him to stop if he was truly in the mood for a fight, and then he told him to think carefully, because battles between the 7 stars are forbidden, to which Crassus found no answer. He simply stood silently, bow in hand. After a few seconds, Crassus lowered his bow and told Ludens that his son's meaning differed from his own. He then said that he himself would go to Estelrum. And then the guy turned around abruptly, and the man just sat calmly in his place, crossing his arms over his chest. After some time, Kim Jun, Sepia, and Evelyn had already reached Etunia. They were standing on snow-covered ground. The witch raised her hand, catching the falling snowflakes in her palm, and asked if it was really snow. In response, Kim Jun asked her if she'd never seen snow. She put her hands behind her head and replied that she'd never been outside the West before. She said that witches rarely wander here because if they are not careful, they can burn alive. She noted that the only witch who could travel across the continent was her teacher, and Kim Jun thought that if they faced the Inquisition, they would not be shown mercy. Exhaling warm steam onto her mittened hands, Sepia asked the boy if he was cold. He replied that he could handle it. After some time, they reached the cave, and it was still snowing outside. Kim Jun noted that it was a good place to hide from the wind, and then suggested that they set up camp there. Sepia, filled with enthusiasm, agreed, and she happily said that she would make a fire. With her mittened hands, she gathered the dry leaves that lay on the ground into a pile, and then she raised her hands, and a small fire appeared in her palms. The girl carefully lowered her hands with fire down, and the leaves immediately caught fire, creating a fire. While Evelyn was moving firewood with the help of magic, she asked the girl how she could now easily light a fire, to which she replied that, compared to her teacher, she still had a lot to learn. Looking back at the girl, the guy noted that she had become stronger in the 2 weeks they had spent with Evelyn. He thought the witch was acting stupid, so he thought she was just bluffing, but it turned out she was a genius. Sitting down on a log, Kim Jun began to look at the system windows, which reported on further actions to complete the quest. The boy had to find and study the history of the Forgotten Swordsman, and the reward was first-level understanding. Meanwhile, the girls were fast asleep. The boy thought that Ludens' friend who was in Stellum was obviously a forgotten follower of the sun god. Could he be one of the 7 stars Evelyn spoke of? Or perhaps he's one of the familiar NPCs, like Ludens. Sighing, the guy quietly said that he wouldn't be able to find out until he met him in person, while he put his hand into his clothes, looking for something there. He thought that, nevertheless, he got something. And then he pulled out some yellow bottle with a smile on his face, while drinking the bottle's contents. He thought it was an elixir that could be found in a secret place in the cave, and that was one of the reasons he decided to stop in this cave. He threw the bottle aside and his body glowed with yellow light, and he thought that it was important for him to restore the stats that had decreased after making a contract with Sepia. He looked back, hearing a sound from behind, which turned out to be Sepia. He asked her if she was awake, to which she replied in the affirmative, and then she asked him if he had gone out anywhere. The boy replied that he had only briefly looked inside the cave, to which Evelyn, who had also woken up, said that he could have done it with magic. Then he said that one should not rely too much on magic. The witch noted that only those people who cannot use her in a false way say this. To which Sepia objected and said that Mr. Dio uses his magic well. Then the witch asked why he couldn't teach her himself. And then she said she felt like he didn't understand anything about her. Digging through his inventory, the guy thought that she was right, because he was constantly using the skill window. And then different things started falling out of the inventory. Noticing this, Evelyn asked in amazement if he could really use a spatial pocket without any artifacts. In response, Kim Jun said that it was the magic of zeros and ones. The witch asked again in shock, and the boy began to rummage through the pile of objects that had fallen to the ground. After a while, he raised the bundle of arrows up, and then he handed them to Sepia, and she asked him what they were. The boy said they would soon arrive in Estelrum, and then he asked her what she thought they were for. She replied that she didn't know. Kim Jun looked at the arrows in his hand with a smile and said that they were made of the highest quality silver. The scene shifted to Estelrum, a city with Romanian influence. And since there are Romanian motifs, it is not surprising that vampires appear there. While walking through the cemetery, Kim Jun asked Evelyn if Ludens was a vampire. Did that mean vampires believed in the sun? To which she replied that this wasn't true. Unlike witches, vampires can believe in other things. She asked how most vampires who aren't under Ludens' influence can end up being bad guys. In response, the boy pointed out that witches weren't innocent either. The witch then exclaimed that they didn't harm people. He then asked about the attack on the farmers, and Evelyn winced at the question. After picking up the silver items, he closed the topic and asked her if she really meant to say that they were not their allies. The witch asked why the boy needed so many silver weapons, and after she remarked that it was such a waste of silver, Kim Jun asked her if she didn't know something. And then he said that a vampire could be killed with one blow. The girl stepped back, and then the guy noted that it seemed to apply to witches too. After some time, the Trinity had already reached the gates of Estelrum itself. Kim Jun was surprised that there was a cemetery right at the entrance to the city, and he asked Evelyn if she could disguise them with magic because the Church of the Moon was looking for them. Taking her staff in her hands, the witch replied that it was as easy as pie. Both Sepia and Kim Jun's appearances changed, and they became blonde and blue-eyed. They looked like brother and sister. The guy told the girl that they would be recognized anyway, so they better put on hoods. And then he said that first they needed to find a place to live and plan their next steps, to which his companion agreed. And Evelyn immediately wondered what the food in this region tasted like. After some time, they reached some room. There was a hot, filling lunch on their table, and Evelyn happily chewed the food that was on the table. Then she noted with admiration that there was so much meat in the soup, which Sepia also agreed with. The girl asked the guy what they would do next. While also chewing, Kim Jun replied that they needed to come up with new names so that the church wouldn't track them down. He noted that Evelyn also had to change her name, and she also couldn't talk about being a witch. And then he put something on the table, and then he offered them to become mercenaries to gather some information. Evelyn remarked enthusiastically that this was interesting. Sepia asked if he really meant they were taking applications, to which the guy replied that everything was so, and that they would be able to integrate into the city's society, and he himself thought that their main goal was to reach level 150. Meanwhile, some people entered the room. One of them asked the other if he had heard the news yet. And, as it turns out, they say that the Inquisitor has already turned the entire Northern River upside down. Another asked if there was a strong knight there, to which he simply replied, was he talking about Sigmund? And then he said that he heard that the Inquisitor took him away, which caused Sepia's expression to freeze. Kim Jun looked at her sympathetically as the men continued to discuss the matter. Getting up from his seat, he told the girl that it was time for them to leave, and then they all left the room together. Kim Jun thought that Sigmund had failed to stop the church, but maybe he could do it. Evelyn asked if they were putting themselves in danger because of Ludens. The boy gritted his teeth and asked what he meant when he said they were on the same side. The witch worriedly said that there must be a reason for the Seven Stars' actions, to which the boy asked what the reason was and whether it was worth increasing the difficulty since the game was so simple. And then he left. And the witch only noted that faith often says absurd things. After some time, they came somewhere again. The man behind the counter greeted them, saying that this was the gathering place for Estelrum's mercenaries. Kim Jun said that they came here to register as mercenaries. The man took them to some ball and told them to touch it, and this ball would determine their level, and then he asked their names. Kim Jun replied that his name was Leo. The girls touched the ball, and it turned out that Sepia was a D rank and Evelyn was a C rank. The man said they were registered, and then told them to look at the wall where the applications were pinned. The company approached the wall and began selecting an application. Kim Jun looked at the wall of applications, thinking, and then he offered to take all applications except hunting. Evelyn exclaimed that there were dozens of them here, and Sepia began to examine what the guy had handed her. Kim Jun replied that it was, and then he told them to pack everything while he went somewhere. Sepia noted with resignation that he was doing it again, and then she said it still looked like he had a plan. Stepping aside, the guy asked himself, why does he need to collect everything one by one? After all, he already has everything he needs for the tasks in his own warehouse. Meanwhile, the girls had collected all the applications, and someone asked them where they were taking them. It turned out that it was the same man who met them at the entrance, and he said that no matter how strong they were, they couldn't do them all at once. He asked if they wanted to leave anything for others. Evelyn was about to agree, but then Sepia exclaimed that they couldn't give out those applications, and then quietly told the witch that she was sure Dio would come and sort this out. Then the man said he would call security, but then Kim Jun appeared. He put some bag on the table with a loud sound. The man asked what it was. Pointing to the girls with applications, he replied that this was what was in all the requests. Crossing his arms over his chest, he announced that he completed the requests in one day. The man looked at the contents of the bag in amazement, and Kim Jun asked him how long it would take to process the applications. The man nervously replied that he didn't even know, and then he shouted, ordering someone to do it. And then he politely told the guy that they would take care of it. But in the meantime, he should come here. Evelyn noted that everything seemed to have ended well. Meanwhile, someone was looking at them with unkind eyes. After some time, there were already whole bags of gold coins lying on the table. Evelyn looked at the money with delight, and she noted that for this amount, she could buy 2 sacks of potatoes. Kim Jun told her she could take as much money as she wanted. The witch asked again in shock. The guy figured he didn't need money. All he needed was experience, and it was so cool that he could level up without doing anything. Meanwhile, the other mercenaries were discussing the company sitting at the table. Kim Jun turned to look at them and thought that they seemed to be drawing too much attention to themselves. However, there is no need to worry about their identities being revealed, as none of them are able to see them through Evelyn's magic. Sepia noticed that the guy had bought himself a new sword. Hearing this, he thought that since his style of using a huge sword and explosive magic was known to everyone, he needed to stop it from today. And this sword against the undead is made of pure silver, making it ideal for use in Stellum. With 2 bags of money in her hands, Evelyn suggested that Sepia go shopping. Sepia noted that it would soon be sunset, to which the witch countered, saying that it didn't matter since they still had so much to explore. The witch came closer to the girl, grabbed her hand, and, not accepting refusal, dragged her along with her. But suddenly Kim Jun asked her what he didn't allow her to go, which made her shudder. Evelyn exclaimed, asking why she couldn't do it, to which the guy calmly replied that it was almost night. Evelyn snuggled closer to Sepia and said that they were no longer children. The guy closed his eyes and replied that if she didn't listen to him, he would take all the money. And then he decided to go up to the room where they were staying. Upon entering the room, the guy immediately fell onto the bed, noting that he no longer had any strength. He thought about the shop he had seen recently where they sold frog kebabs. Should he take the girls there tomorrow? He chuckled and thought that his companions looked like high school girls on a school field trip. His eyes began to close as he thought about how he had pushed his body up several levels today, and so tomorrow he would put Mao's body to rest. Meanwhile, someone stood under the motel window, and someone asked if this was the right motel. The man replied with a grin that he was absolutely sure that this was where they were staying, and, as it turned out, there was not a couple of men standing under the guy's windows, but a whole crowd. One man said he didn't even remember the names of these newcomers, to which another replied that it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were going to rob them today. And then he said that the second room on the 4th floor was occupied by girls, and the guy was staying in room number 3. The man held up 2 fingers and said that they needed to split up and break into the room simultaneously through the front doors and windows. He said that they must kill everyone and leave no one alive. Another man asked if he was ashamed to kill the girls, to which the first man replied that although it was vile, they had to do it. The man said that if the girls squealed, they would become a pain in the ass, so they needed to do something about it. He said that he and Joseph would handle the guy and the rest of us would handle the girls, and then he took his place by the guy's window. Another took up his position right outside the door of his room. The man thought with a grin that there were only 10 seconds left before the instant attack. The man outside the window also began counting down the seconds before they all attacked together. But suddenly something flew straight into the man's forehead, and everything around was covered in blood. The man outside the window noticed this, and his eyes widened in shock. Noticing that they seemed to have been noticed, He slammed his elbow into the glass, breaking it, and flew straight into the room. And then he flew at the guy with a sword in his hand. However, Kim Jun dodged the blow. He swung his sword, cutting the man's body, causing blood to spray into the air. The wounded man fell to the floor with a dull thud, and now the main character looked at the results of their attack, flowing from all surfaces of the room. Kim Jun shouted and asked the girls if everything was okay, to which they, also surprising the men, replied that, of course, everything was fine with them. Evelyn asked who these guys were because they just slept all night. Kim Jun replied that they were murderers, thieves, scum, and all that. And he thought about how Evelyn was still a level 150 witch who even had her own familiar. Suddenly, he turned his head sharply, noticing something. And then he said that it was too early to relax. The girl asked if there was anyone left, to which the witch replied that she could not see anyone with her navigational magic. The guy noticed someone coming and thought he probably smelled blood. Only vampires and werewolves are sensitive to the smell of blood, so who is it? And someone's footsteps were heard outside the door. The girls were in complete shock. The guy's face also took on a surprised expression when he saw who entered the room. As it turned out, it was the same man who met them at the mercenaries' office. The boy wondered if he was a vampire hiding in human form. The man bowed and said that he had one request for them. And then he introduced himself, saying that he was a vampire hiding in human form, and his name was Robert. Kim Jun asked him what he wanted to ask for. Robert lowered his head and said that he was talking about his master, whom he served. Their master is a vampire who has decided to coexist with humans, and his unbreakable rule is that no harm should be done to humans, which is why they suffer every time there is a full moon, when the thirst for blood comes. Therefore, he always has a supply of blood, and he can take it by contacting a funeral home or collect it directly from the corpse. That's why he came here, because of the smell of corpse and blood. But in the end, he encountered something special. Sophia, after thinking, asked again. Robert said it was all about the guy's blood, and he pointed his finger at him. The man exclaimed that he felt there was something special in his blood, and that was why he wanted to ask for a favor. He said that if the boy had called them to take at least some of his blood, it would have helped his master. But suddenly his body was tied with some kind of luminous threads. As it turned out, it was Evelyn who told the man not to lie, because she had never heard of vampires living side by side with humans. Falling to the floor, still shackled, the man cried out for help, as he could not leave empty-handed. Evelyn yelled at him to shut up when Kim Jun suddenly asked the girls to step outside for a minute. He lowered himself to be closer to the man and told him what he had told him about his master. Robert replied that he could not speak of him that way, but he could arrange a meeting if he gave some blood. Hearing this, the witch pulled the threads tighter and asked him if he had gone crazy, and Sepia tried to calm her down and said that they should listen to him. The witch asked if they really believed this vampire, to which Kim Jun thought that she was a witch. He thought that since Robert belonged to another vampire, his master was a lord, and therefore there was a chance that this lord was the same friend from Estelrum, and therefore they can enter under the guise that they simply want to donate blood. The boy asked the man where his master was and whether it was a dangerous place. Robert replied that he was in a camp in the middle of a calic forest and he could not guarantee safety, but he could lead them there. Hearing this, Kim Jun agreed. Robert happily said he could take them there right away. The guy said he would contact him when they were ready. As the men left the room, Sepia asked if it would be okay if they came with him. Kim Jun replied that he couldn't say it was safe because werewolves and vampires lived in that forest. However, the camp in the center that Robert is talking about is different. The monsters have quietly made this a place of peace where no friction is allowed. The girl asked why he didn't want to go right now. The guy replied that he could not go to the Lord in such a state. And after some time, he gave Evelyn a new dress, which was a level 150 wizard's robe, and the girl asked if it was for her. Kim Jun replied that it was much better than the cloak she had worn before, and the witch exclaimed that it was time to throw away the old one. And then he started getting something for Sepia too, and Kim Jun took out the Void Amulet, which cancels the effect of the Furious Death attack. Sepia thanked the guy, and he told her that it was some kind of talisman, and therefore she should always keep it with her. The boy thought about how he had taken the bare necessities for himself and shared the rest, and then he said that it was time for them to move on. After some time, they reached the Kalika Forest, which is a hunting ground inhabited mainly by vampires and werewolves. Almost all the monsters from these places were originally human. They would accidentally become vampires or werewolves and run into this forest, as if someone were chasing them. However, the coexistence of two different species that lived by hunting people was impossible, which led to constant conflict, which escalated to the point of mutual annihilation. But after the establishment of a central camp, the species survived. And in the very center of this camp, there is a hut. Robert said that this was where his master was and gestured for the guests to come in. Kim Jun thought that there was an NPC herbalist living in this place who would provide various assistance to players. Are they a vengeful vampire lord? This vampire seems to be the same as Ludens, an extra character that you don't pay attention to during the game, but eventually becomes an important character. The man turned to the door and told the owner that he had brought guests. Following this, the door of the hut slowly opened, and from where a man with a mustache came out and with a smile on his face said that he heard that this would be special blood. He said he never thought they would have such valuable guests here. The man told them to come in, and then, turning to Robert, he told him to bring tea. Kim Jun wondered if the man recognized Sepia since he called them important guests. Suddenly, the man noticed that he saw familiar faces among the guests, and in response, Evelyn addressed him, calling him Mr. Schwald. Mr. Schwald said that she had grown taller since their last meeting, and then he asked if everything was okay with her teacher, to which the witch replied that everything was fine. Kim Jun, watching this, wondered if this vampire really belonged to the 7 stars, since he was acquainted with teacher Evelyn. Soon they all entered the hut and sat down on the benches there. The vampire introduced himself, saying his name was Schwald Eindhauer, and then he asked if Sepia and Dio were there. Looking at the girl, he noticed her silver hair and golden eyes and noted that she looked like that man. Kim Jun noted that the man seemed to know about them, and then he asked if he belonged to the 7 stars. Laughing, Schwald replied that although he was insignificant, he still belonged to them. But in response, the guy suddenly apologized, and then he said he just couldn't believe him. Robert exclaimed about how rude it was, but the vampire hastened to reassure him, saying that they were valued guests. And then, with the same smile, he told the boy that he understood his caution, because they still knew so little about them. Kim Jun apologized for his rudeness, then said that it was because Ludens had put them in danger. The guy thought that he was not yet sure whether the 7 stars were reliable allies or if they just wanted to use them. So the only thing he can trust now is the system. He asked Schwald if he could tell him about the forgotten power he had accidentally obtained. Sighing, the man replied that it would not be difficult for him. And then he suddenly jumped up from his seat. The man said that first he had to check if he had the same key. Discouraged, Kim Jun asked about the key again. Then they came out of the hut and stood opposite each other. Clenching his fist, the boy asked what was required of him to demonstrate the forgotten power he had received. In response to this, Schwald merely shook his head. And then he said that the power the boy received was not the true power of the sun. A shocked Kim Jun asked the man what he meant. Instead of answering, he simply turned around and headed somewhere. And then he suddenly hit the stone with one hand. The man's fist caused cracks to appear on the stone. The guy was perplexed and wondered what he was doing, whether he had really decided to demonstrate his strength. He thought that it could be done easily if you were a level 300 martial artist. But the man was one of the 7 stars. Was that all he could do? Schwald told the boy to come and take a look. And coming closer, Kim Jun looked at the cracks in the stone where something was happening. And the next second, this very stone crumbled into dust, causing the guy to freeze in amazement. Then the man said that this is exactly the power of the sun. He asked the guy if he could do it right now, to which he replied that he couldn't use that kind of force. Then the man asked him if he wanted to understand this power. In response, Kim Jun asked if he could learn from him how to use the power of the sun. Schwald replied that of course he could, if he really had the key. The boy then wondered what this key was that he kept talking about, and whether it was related to the fact that he received power from the Death Knight. However, he thought that he had no time to think and confidently agreed to the man's proposal. With the same smile on his face, the man said that the guy was thinking correctly. And then he said that he would like to ask for something first, and he coughed awkwardly. In response, the guy asked if he meant blood. They returned to the hut, and Schwald said that, as they all already knew, all believers in the sun were cursed. And this affected him more than others. So when the full moon comes, he goes berserk and becomes furious. As Kim Jun sipped his tea, he thought it was very unusual for a vampire to go crazy during a full moon. And then he said that in any case, he and Sepia would stay here while he trained him. Hearing this, Evelyn asked about her. Then Schwald asked if she already had her own teacher, to which she replied that she also believed in the sun. The man said that if she learned the theory, it might be useful to her someday, but for now they should rest, and tomorrow they would begin training. The next day arrived. There was breakfast on the table in the hut, and suddenly someone asked what it was. As it turned out, it was Evelyn who noticed that there was no meat in this breakfast, only grass, in response to which Robert said that she might not eat at all then. Turning to him, she became indignant, saying that she had lost a lot of blood and therefore needed to restore her strength. Meanwhile, Chevald appeared behind her and asked if the food was really that bad, causing the girl to freeze. She turned around awkwardly and said that everything was very tasty, and Kim Jun, chewing his food, thought that the man really fit in well with society. He wondered if it was possible that he was going crazy because they were vegetarians. After breakfast, they all left the hut to begin training. Chevald asked the boy to demonstrate his skills before starting a full-fledged training session. Kim Jun grabbed his sword and stepped forward. He took the sword in both hands and stood in a stance, and then he jumped up and began to cut through space with his sword. The log that stood there split into several pieces. Sepia watched in amazement while Robert looked on appraisingly. Kim Jun thought that this was not all. There will be more to come. And landing on the ground, he began swinging his sword again, hitting pieces of wood that were still in the air. A red mark appeared on each of the pieces. And then the guy used his explosion technique and a powerful explosion went off behind him. Somewhat stunned, Chevald sighed, and Evelyn asked if the guy really possessed such techniques. Kim Jun told the man that this was the limit of his capabilities, to which he replied that this was enough. And then he said that he missed this style of fencing and asked if it was Adelia Dark. Kim Jun replied that everything was correct, and then asked the man who she was. Chevald said she was a strong and graceful paladin. She was the sun's sword and shield and wasn't afraid to take the initiative. Kim Jun, continuing his story, said that this girl was cursed just like the 7 stars, and then she even became a death knight. Finishing his story, the man said that this was precisely why no one could find her. And then Chevald said that, unfortunately, he was a monk who practiced martial arts, and therefore is unlikely to be of any help in the art of the sword. And then he pointed his finger at the guy and said that he definitely had the ability to use the power of the sun, and if he learned Adelia's sword style, he would definitely be able to use this power. He said that mana is determined based on individual abilities and not by the power of the sun, but a guy can become strong regardless of his individual abilities. Evelyn asked why this was so, holding out his hand in which something glowed with a bright light. The man said that the power of the sun exists wherever there is light. Kim Jun looked at this with his mouth wide open, and Chevald continued, saying that in order to use the power of the sun, not only was energy taken from their bodies, it could be used by absorbing light from the outside. The man pressed his free hand against the hand filled with light, saying that if he absorbed enough external light to use the power of the sun, and then, without finishing the sentence, he extended his hand forward. A bright beam of light shot out from his hand and flew forward, and in the place where this beam hit, a big explosion thundered. And finally, when this happened, Chevald finished his sentence by saying that then they would be able to free her in this way. Kim Jun's eyes widened in shock as he thought that his explosions were nothing compared to this explosion. Turning to the man, he said he was talking as if it wasn't that hard, to which the man laughed and said that it was okay if he didn't succeed the first time, and he would help him. The boy pressed his lips tightly together and thought that although a difficult path awaited him, he must definitely obtain this power of the sun. And then he exclaimed with confidence that they should try it then. Chevald began serious training only 3 days later. Kim Jun was very focused, and he sat on the ground in the street, his legs crossed and his hands folded on his knees, his fingertips touching. He thought that although Chevald had told him to start with meditation, he seemed to be completely unsuited to it, and it seemed that nothing was working out for him. He said that one should meditate primarily in sunlight, as this will help one feel the power of the sun. He sighed and thought that he had no other choice anyway, so he would have to try. Suddenly, a scream was heard somewhere, and it was Evelyn calling for Sepia. Hearing this, the boy closed his eyes tightly. Sepia, who was running past, asked Evelyn, who was barely running behind, if she was okay. The completely sweaty witch asked the girl where she got so much strength, to which she replied that Mr. Dio made her do physical training. Kim Jun thought about how he gave the two of them a task to kill a forest monster, and then he asked them how many they had caught so far. Sepia held out her open palm to him, on which lay 2 fangs, and she said that they had already killed 2. Clutching her head, Evelyn screamed that she almost died, and then she exclaimed that Mr. Chevald was too cruel in restricting her main power, shadow magic. With a smile on her face, Sepia told her mentor that it was thanks to her that she was able to catch them, to which she replied that of course it was, and she could do even more. Having already stood up, the guy thought that Chevald had imposed some restrictions on them in order to develop the power of the sun, Chevald told them. First, think that the power of the sun is always with you when the sunlight is blocked by tree canopies. Secondly, in combat, you need to use spells related to fire and light. The guy thought that the monsters in this place were around level 140, and the Flood would have a hard time dealing with even Evelyn, who was level 150 since her magic was limited. And yet there won't be any real danger for a long time, because Shuvald will protect them? Sepia asked Kim Jun if he had made any progress, to which the boy became embarrassed and did not give any intelligible answers. He remembered that Shuvald had spoken of his advanced technique also drawing on the power of the sun, and so if he tried to understand its principle, he would be able to comprehend the power of the sun. Kim Jun thought of this principle of the extended technique of inviting and then emitting the absorbed light, which he understands very well. A charred black piece of wood suddenly fell next to him. Looking out the system window, he thought that this meant that he had to use the power of the sun without any help from the system. He looked at the skill development conditions, 3 of which were almost all met, but the 4th was still unknown. The boy thought about how he drank the potion and used the advanced technique all night, but still felt nothing. And if he reaches the 100 use mark, will he feel anything new? A few hours later, it was already lunchtime, and an irritated Robert asked Evelyn, who was chewing her food continuously, if she really had a black hole in her stomach. Kim Jun remarked out loud that not a day went by without them arguing, to which Shuvald asked if it wasn't nice to see young people so full of life. The man told his servant that they all here believed in the sun, and therefore they needed to be more friendly. They needed to work together to get through this, to which Robert replied that he understood. Kim Jun asked the man why he worked as a herbalist. He noted that the other 7 stars lived differently, increasing their power, and he himself thought about how Ludens leads the Golden Dawn, and the Balanced Witch leads the other witches. Shuvald replied that if he wanted to restore faith in the sun, he had to make wise choices, and he had many allies before too. Then the guy asked why everything had changed now. In response to this, the man only said that it was all because of the curse. Kim Jun, somewhat upset, found nothing to say and thought that it seemed their bloodlust was too strong. With the arrival of the full moon, vampires and werewolves lose their minds and experience a tremendous thirst for blood. But the boy believed that powerful beings like Shuvald could control this. The man asked the boy if he had ever said he was a monk before he was cursed. Then he said all monks are ascetics. They practice repentance, give up greed for anything, and purify their minds. And it was during those times that he learned the principle, do no harm to others. And then he said that this is why, even after he was cursed and his body became like this, he has no intention of harming people, and that is why he lives in such a remote place. Kim Jun thought that a man with such a curse would have no chance of creating a group of followers. And then he asked him if he could tell him more about the events of the past, to which he asked him, didn't he say that he would tell when the boy learned the power of the sun? Awkwardly looking away, the boy admitted it was too difficult for him. He couldn't feel a power he'd never felt before. In response to this, Shuvald said that the guy already knows a lot. The guy asked again, confused, to which the man replied that his thoughts were too confused precisely because he knew so much. And then he told him to look at Sepia, who was drinking tea at the time, and she paid attention to them. Shuvald, looking at her, said that she was like a blank slate, and therefore learned faster because she knew nothing. In response, the girl, with an awkward smile on her face, asked if this was really such a compliment. And then, thinking, she said that she definitely felt something yesterday, felt something warm. Kim Jun smiled awkwardly and looked at the girl, thinking that Sepia's talent was frightening because she immediately came to feel something, and if this continued, she would overtake him. The man asked the boy if he knew why he had advised him to start with meditation, causing the boy to break away from his thoughts and look at him. The guy answered the question by saying that he did it because he felt the power, but he had no ability at all, to which the man said that this was not the case at all. And then he asked him to remember how he started the conversation, and again said that the guy knew too much. As he walked outside, Kim Jun thought that perhaps he really did have too many thoughts, because ever since he entered this world, he has been constantly thinking about something. Inventory, survival, system, quests, characters, forgotten followers. Sitting down in a meditative pose again, he decided that he would now try to put all these thoughts aside, at least for a moment. Meanwhile, something was happening in one of the city taverns. The man sitting there was shouting loudly, asking for a drink and the strongest one. A second later, the frightened waiter placed a mug of alcohol on the table with a loud sound. Taking the mug in his hands, the man took a sip from it and noted that they know how to make alcohol in the northern region. As it turned out, it was the Inquisitor, Galeth Hontut. The Inquisitor joyfully raised his hand with the mug up and exclaimed how good it was that he was the one sent north, while the rest of those present looked at him with irritation. Suddenly, he heard someone ask another if he heard what the guy said. A man sitting at another table asked why Gordon and Joseph had not been seen for the past few days. And then he said he heard that they made a mistake and chose the wrong target. Another man asked the first man if it was true they were working with mercenaries who had fulfilled the request. How strong were they to be of such a level? Someone slammed their hand down on the table, causing the man to jump back in fright and squeal. The man addressed the others in a deep voice. As it turned out, it was the Inquisitor who, with a smirk on his face, asked the men where the guy they were talking about was now. Meanwhile, a loud sound was heard in the Kalikovo forest. Sepia, hearing this sound, turned around in fear, and as it turned out, 2 red wolves were running quickly there, and the girl screamed for Mr. Dio to be careful. Kim Jun stood calmly. His eyes were closed, as if he wasn't paying attention to anything at all. He opened his eyes and stared ahead, fully prepared, while Chevald's words about knowing too much echoed in his head. Holding his sword out in front of him and taking a stance, he thought about how, until now, whenever he activated his skills, he received help from the system. But if he could use them without her help, everything would be different. One of the monsters jumped up to attack the guy from above, and the boy responded by swinging his sword, causing a bright flash to appear in the air. However, this blow did almost no damage to the monster, merely lightly scratching his arm. With a menacing roar, the monster turned around, its eyes glowing a menacing red light, and the guy only noted that nothing had activated. A second later, the monster struck again with its huge paw. But the guy managed to dodge, and so the blow hit the ground. After jumping back a few meters, Kim Jun returned to his original position and thought that he needed to try again. And he needs to imagine the power of the sun as Chevald saw it. But suddenly, a second monster's paw appeared behind the boy's head. Feeling this, the boy opened his eyes wide, but still managed to turn around to block the blow with his sword, causing sparks to fly in all directions. But the monster wasn't about to give up. He raised his paw again to strike. Kim Jun swore while gritting his teeth and thought that if he used his system abilities, he could easily cut off his claws. He swung his sword sharply right in front of the monster's nose, causing it to involuntarily flinch. When the guy was surrounded by monsters, one was behind him, and the other was right in front of him. Sepia and Evelyn were hiding in the bushes, and the witch, worried, asked if he was in pain and whether they should help him, but the girl did not answer. She just looked ahead and then told the other one with a serious expression that they needed to believe in him. The monster struck again with its huge paw, and the guy blocked the blow with his sword again. However, now the wolf rushed forward with its whole body, attacking him, causing the boy to rise into the air. But Kim Jun wasn't about to take the blow, so he abruptly straightened his leg, hitting the monster in the side, sending it flying back. Kim Jun landed on the ground, kicking up dust, and said with a sigh that they should have taken it easy. The guy took a deep breath, closing his eyes, and he thought that in order to use the power of the sun, he needs to forget all the emerging strategies that clog his thoughts. Chevald said that one must meditate under the sun if he wanted to feel its power. Thinking about this, he rushed forward, running past the monster. Then he spun around, breaking his legs and thrusting his sword forward. Kim Jun began to spin around, swinging his sword, causing bright flashes to appear in the air from his swings. And then he struck the trunk of one of the trees, causing the place where he struck to glow with a bright light. And then the tree fell to the ground right in front of Kim Jun. Kim Jun looked at his sword, smiled, and said that it was excellent. His sword shone with a bright light. Kim Jun looked at his smiling reflection in the blade of the sword and wondered if he would try again now. And then, as if answering his own question, he held his shining sword out in front of him. A second later, the guy took off, and all that was left of him was a cloud of dust. He jumped up, his hands above his head, and he was about to attack the monster from above. The next second, he struck the monster straight in the chest, causing an even brighter flash and blood to spray into the air. The girls, who were still sitting in the bushes, looked at this with admiration. Stunned by this result, Kim Jun stared at the sword in his hand. There was another monster in front of him, but suddenly the guy opened his hand, and the sword fell to the ground. Evelyn screamed in panic, asking why he had thrown the sword to the ground. And the inspired Sepia simply looked at the guy, not doubting him at all. And as it turned out, Kim Jun was now about to fight with his fists, and his whole body was engulfed in a bright light, similar to the light of the sun. He clenched his fist tightly, causing the light around him to become even brighter. And then he delivered a sharp blow straight into the monster's chest. The blow caused the monster's eyes to roll back in its head. Its mouth opened wide, revealing sharp teeth, and a few drops of blood flew from its mouth. But the guy didn't stop there. He raised 2 fingers up and then clicked them, causing a bright flash. And right in front of his face, there was a powerful explosion. Absorbed the body of the monster. Sepia and Evelyn stared at this, their mouths wide open and their heads held high. Sepia noted that this was the same power of the sun that Mr. Shuvald had used. She thought happily that he had succeeded. But Kim Jun remained standing, staring at the hand raised before him. The system reported that the hidden condition, Forgotten Sword Art, had been unlocked, and Sepia's faith had increased to 8. Kim Jun stared at the system window in front of him, which listed the skill development conditions, 3 of which were almost completed. The boy couldn't help but notice that the 4th condition had been revealed to him, and he thought with relief that he could now awaken the power of the sun within himself. But suddenly he noticed that the 4th condition was only half fulfilled, and he stared at it irritably. And then he said that it was a pity, of course, but he could be content with it. Meanwhile, the joyful girls ran up to him. The boy thought it was good that Sepia's faith had grown, and it seemed she was worried that he wouldn't be able to summon the power within himself. With a smile on his face, he asked them about their training. But suddenly the guy's face distorted with pain, and some kind of flash lit up in his chest, to which he involuntarily reached out with his hand. The boy noted that he felt as if his heart was being squeezed. He wondered what it was. Could this be a side effect of the sun's power? The boy's body couldn't withstand the impact, and so he coughed up blood and his eyes rolled back. Kim Jun lost consciousness and fell to the ground, blood spraying from his mouth around him.